Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Eli had always been drawn to places that felt like they were stuck in time. The dusty corners of thrift stores, the musty smell of forgotten books, and the old technology that no one seemed to want anymore. He wandered into Lark's Emporium on a quiet Saturday afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the cracked windows. The store was a maze of shelves, each crammed with everything from faded vinyl records to old kitchenware. It was the kind of place where you could lose hours, sifting through other people's discarded memories. Eli had no particular reason for being there, other than to escape the reality of his life. The house was empty, his parents gone for the weekend, and the world outside felt like too much. His thoughts constantly returned to his sibling, Sam, the accident, the silence that followed. It was easier to get lost in the past, in the strange objects that seemed to hold a forgotten history. As he wandered deeper into the store, something caught his eye. It was an old, unremarkable phone, sitting on a shelf tucked between a stack of old magazines. The phone was cracked and scratched, its once glossy surface dulled by years of neglect. It looked like something you might find in a drawer at your grandmother's house, something that had been left behind in the rush of upgrading to something newer, something faster. Eli felt a strange pull toward it. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was heavier than he expected, solid, with a weight that felt almost intentional. A sense of unease washed over him, but he shrugged it off. He had been feeling a little off lately. Maybe it was just his mood. The store owner, a thin man with graying hair and a permanent frown, noticed him holding the phone. He shuffled over slowly, as if each step took effort. His eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Eli. "That one's not like the others," the man said, his voice raspy, as though he hadn't spoken in days. "It's different." Eli raised an eyebrow. "It's just a phone." The man hesitated, his gaze lingering on Eli's face. "It's not. You should leave it alone." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. The man's words didn't make sense, but there was something about the way he said them that made him pause. Still, Eli was used to ignoring warnings. He had learned to tune out the noise, people, their fears, their superstitions. He placed the phone in his basket. "How much?" he asked. The man didn't answer right away. He stared at the phone for a long moment, as though contemplating something. Then, with a sigh, he muttered, $2. "But be careful with it." Eli nodded, paying for the phone and leaving the store without a second thought. That night, Eli sat on his bed, the phone resting in his lap. He had plugged it into charge, even though it seemed to be an outdated model. It didn't matter. He wasn't planning to use it much. He had other things to occupy his time, like the internet, where the world was just a few clicks away. But something about the phone intrigued him. Maybe it was the way it felt in his hands, or the way it seemed to hum with a strange energy. The phone's screen flickered to life, the dim glow casting a pale light in the dark room. Eli picked it up, unsure what to expect. The screen was cracked, but the numbers still appeared clearly. No messages, no notifications. Just a blank screen. Then it rang. The sound of the ringtone was strange, an old-fashioned melody that didn't match the phone's modern design. Eli froze, his thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't recognize the number. It was an unknown call, but the number itself seemed off. It was a jumble of digits, with no area code or recognizable pattern. He debated ignoring it, but something made him answer. "Hello?" Eli's voice was shaky, unsure. There was silence on the other end, a long, oppressive silence. Just when Eli was about to hang up, a voice broke through. "The accident. It's not your fault, but you can't escape it." Eli's heart skipped a beat. The voice was distorted, barely audible, like it was coming from underwater. His hand trembled as he held the phone to his ear. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The voice didn't answer. Instead, a flash of an image appeared on the screen, a photo of a car crash. It was old, blurry, but Eli recognized it immediately. It was the accident. the one that had taken Sam's life. He pulled the phone away from his ear, his breath catching in his throat. The call ended abruptly, and the screen went black. Eli stared at the phone, his mind racing. How could it know? How could it show him that? He had never told anyone the details of the accident, not even Maya. But somehow, the phone knew. The call left Eli shaken, but he told himself it was just a prank, a weird coincidence. He tried to ignore the strange feeling gnawing at him, the sense that something had shifted. The phone was just a phone after all, nothing more. But the next day, when he picked it up again, he found a message waiting for him. It was a picture, a blurry image of a street corner, the kind of place he passed by every day on his way to school. But something was wrong about it. The shadows were too dark, the colors too muted. The longer he stared at it, the more familiar it became. The image was of the same street corner where Sam had been killed. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was hallucinating or if something truly supernatural was happening. But he knew one thing. The phone was connected to something beyond his understanding. The message itself was short, cryptic. You can't change what's already happened, but you can try. Eli had to tell someone. He couldn't keep this to himself any longer. He needed someone to confirm that he wasn't losing his mind. Maya, his best friend since childhood, was the obvious choice. She had always been the rational one, the one who could talk him down when he got too lost in his head. She knew about Sam, about the accident, about everything. If anyone could help him make sense of the phone, it was Maya. He found her in the school library, flipping through a book on ancient myths. She looked up when he sat down beside her. "What's up?" she asked, sensing the unease in his voice. Eli hesitated. He didn't know how to explain it. How could he? The phone was something. Other. Something that didn't belong in the real world. But he had to try. "Maya, something's wrong with this phone I found. It's showing me things. Things from my past. Things I never told anyone." She frowned, clearly concerned. "What kind of things?" Eli told her about the call, the photo, the message. He described the strange sense of deja vu, the way the phone seemed to know things it shouldn't. Maya's face paled as he spoke. That's not normal. Eli, you need to get rid of it." "I can't," he replied, his voice tight. "I think it's trying to help me. It's showing me things I need to see." Maya shook her head, her eyes full of worry. "Or it's trying to control you. You don't know what you're dealing with." But Eli couldn't stop himself. The pull of the phone was too strong. He had to see what it would show him next. The days following the conversation with Maya felt like a blur. Eli couldn't stop thinking about the phone, couldn't shake the feeling that it was trying to tell him something important. Each time he picked it up, the messages were more urgent, more cryptic. The visions came faster, each one more disturbing than the last. One afternoon, as he sat in his room, staring at the phone, a new message appeared on the screen. It was a picture, a blurry image of a park, a place Eli used to visit with Sam. The shadows in the image stretched unnaturally long, and the colors were off, like the photo had been taken through a fog. Below the picture was a single sentence. "The future can be changed, but only if you act in time." Eli's heart raced. He didn't understand what the phone was trying to say, but he couldn't ignore the sense of urgency that flooded through him. What was it showing him? What did it want him to do? That night, as he lay in bed, the phone rang again. The ringtone was the same eerie melody, but this time, it felt different, more insistent, more demanding. He hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was distorted, but it sounded familiar. It was a woman's voice, soft and pleading. "Save her. Save Maya. She's in danger." Eli's breath caught in his throat. Maya? The message didn't make sense. He had seen her earlier that day, and she seemed fine. But the phone's voice was clear. There was no mistaking it. "You can't wait. You must act now." The call ended abruptly, and Eli was left staring at the screen, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing. If something happened to Maya, he would never forgive himself. The phone had warned him. He couldn't ignore it. The next day, Eli couldn't focus on anything. His mind kept returning to the phone's message. Maya was in danger. But how? And why? He texted her, asking if everything was okay. She responded quickly, assuring him that she was fine, But Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He decided to follow her after school, just to be sure. As he watched from a distance, he saw Maya walk down the street toward the park. The same park from the vision. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. He had to follow her. He had to make sure she was safe. He ran after her, keeping a safe distance, but when he reached the park, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A black car was parked by the entrance, its engine running. A man stood by the door, his face obscured by shadows. Eli's instincts kicked in. He had to warn Maya. He stepped forward, but before he could reach her, the man grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the car. "Maya!" Eli shouted, his voice breaking through the air. She turned, her eyes wide with fear. But before she could react, the man shoved her into the car and slammed the door. The car sped off, disappearing down the street. Eli stood frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He had seen the danger, just like the phone had warned him, but he had been too late. Eli's world tilted. The phone had shown him the future, and he had failed to change it. He had let Maya slip away, just as he had let Sam slip away. The guilt gnawed at him. But beneath it, there was something else, something darker. The phone was right. The future could be changed. But at what cost? As days passed, Eli's obsession with the phone deepened. He spent hours scrolling through its messages, searching for any clue that could help him undo the mistake he had made. The phone was relentless, sending him more and more visions, some of things that hadn't happened yet, and others of things he couldn't forget. One night, as he sat in his room, staring at the phone, a new message appeared. It was a video this time, grainy and distorted, but unmistakable. The video showed Maya, bound and gagged, sitting in the back of the same black car. Her eyes were wide with terror. The phone's message was simple. If you want to save her, you must act quickly. The time is running out. Eli's pulse raced. He had to save her. He had to do whatever it took. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the phone wasn't just showing him the future. It was controlling him. Each decision he made, each step he took, felt like it was being guided by an unseen force. And the phone's power was growing stronger. Eli couldn't sleep that night. The image of Maya, trapped and helpless, haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. He had to find her, but he didn't know where to start. The next morning, Maya's parents reported her missing. The police were called, and a search began, but Eli knew that time was running out. The phone had warned him, but he hadn't acted fast enough. He tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic began to set in. He had to do something, anything. That afternoon, he received another message from the phone. This time it was a map. It showed a location outside the city, deep in the woods. The map was marked with a single X, and beneath it was a message. Find her before it's too late. Eli didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, stuffed the phone into his pocket, and ran out the door. The woods were dark and dense, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels. Eli's heart thudded in his chest as he followed the map's directions. The phone buzzed in his pocket, the screen flashing with more messages, more cryptic warnings. You're getting closer. Don't stop now. But as he neared the marked location, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something wasn't right. The air was thick with tension, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the woods. And then he saw it. The black car was parked at the edge of a clearing, its engine still running. Maya was nowhere to be seen. Eli approached cautiously, his breath coming in short bursts. He had to make a choice. The phone had brought him here, but now it was up to him to save her. Suddenly, the phone rang again. Eli's hands shook as he answered it. You're too late, the voice on the other end said, cold and indifferent. You can't change the past. You can't escape it. The phone went dead. Eli stood frozen, staring at the car. The future was slipping away from him, just like Sam, just like Maya. He had tried to control it, tried to change it, but the phone had shown him the truth. Some things couldn't be undone. With a final, desperate glance at the car, Eli turned and walked away. The days that followed were a blur. Maya's body was found in the woods, but the circumstances of her death were never clear. The police couldn't find any evidence of foul play, but Eli knew the truth. The phone had led him to her, but it had also led him to the realization that there were some things he could never change. He destroyed the phone, smashing it against the pavement, hoping to sever the connection once and for all. But even as he watched it crack and break, he knew that the curse would never truly be gone. The funeral was a quiet affair. Maya's parents had been devastated by her disappearance and the circumstances surrounding her death. The police had found no clear answers, no clues that could explain how she had ended up in the woods. They had questioned Eli, but he had no answers to give. He couldn't explain the phone, the visions, or the cryptic messages. He couldn't even explain why he hadn't been able to save her. Eli didn't go to the funeral. He couldn't. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant presence that refused to let him forget. He had failed her, just like he had failed Sam. He sat in his room, staring at the broken pieces of the phone. It lay in the corner, its screen shattered and its body cracked, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. The phone had been his only connection to something beyond himself, to a world that seemed to exist outside of time and logic. But now that it was broken, it felt like a part of him was gone too. His mind kept returning to the phone's final message. You can't change the past. You can't escape it. But what if he could? What if there was still a way to undo everything? It had been a week since the funeral, and Eli had barely left his room. He couldn't face anyone, not his parents, not his friends, and certainly not the world. Everything felt like it was slipping away, like he was being pulled into a darkness he couldn't escape. Then, one night, as he lay in bed, the phone buzzed. His heart stopped. Eli had thrown the phone away, or so he thought. He had left it in the trash outside, but now, somehow, it had returned. It was on his nightstand, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. He reached for it, his hands trembling as he picked it up. The screen flickered, and a new message appeared. You can still fix it. You can still save her. Eli's breath caught in his throat. It was impossible. He had destroyed the phone. He had destroyed the connection. But here it was again, as if it had never left. The phone continued to buzz, the screen flashing with more messages, more visions. It showed him images of Maya, alive, smiling, laughing. It was as if she was still there, still waiting for him to save her. You have one last chance, the phone whispered, its voice soft and coaxing. One last chance to change everything. Eli felt a surge of hope. Could it be true? Could he really save her? Could he undo the mistakes he had made? But then, a new message appeared, one that made his blood run cold. The price will be higher this time. The phone's messages grew more insistent, more desperate. It showed Eli visions of Maya, trapped in the same dark car, the same fate awaiting her. But this time, the phone promised him that he could change it. He could save her. Eli was torn. He knew he shouldn't trust the phone. He knew it was dangerous, that it had already cost him so much. But the temptation was too great. The guilt, the grief, it all pushed him toward the phone, toward the possibility of redemption. He began to obsess over the phone's messages, studying each one for clues, for hints on how to save Maya. The visions came faster, more vivid, each one showing him different paths, different outcomes. But no matter what he did, no matter how many times he tried to change the future, it always ended the same. Maya was still lost. The phone was toying with him, playing on his emotions, pushing him further into madness. And yet, Eli couldn't stop. He couldn't stop trying to fix what was broken. One night, as he sat alone in his room, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. You've already made your choice. Eli's stomach dropped. What did that mean? Had he already sealed his fate? Was there no way to save Maya? No way to escape the phone's influence? The next day, Eli woke to find the phone on his nightstand again, but this time, it wasn't alone. There was something else beside it, a small, black envelope sealed with an intricate symbol. His heart raced as he picked it up, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The envelope was cold to the touch, as though it had been waiting for him. He tore it open, his hands shaking. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in dark ink. The price for saving her is your soul. Eli stared at the words, his mind reeling. What did that mean? Was the phone trying to trick him? Was it playing on his fear? But as he read the message again, he realized that it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. He had already paid a price. He had lost Sam. He had lost Maya. And now, the phone was offering him one last chance to change everything. But at what cost? Eli knew he had to make a choice. He could continue to chase the impossible, trying to rewrite history, or he could accept the consequences of his actions and let the past remain where it belonged. But the phone wouldn't let him go that easily. Eli stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow from the sleepless nights spent obsessing over the phone's messages. The weight of his choices pressed down on him, and for the first time, he realized that there was no way out. The phone had consumed him, had led him down a path from which there was no return. He picked up the phone one last time, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the messages. The visions of Maya, alive, smiling, waiting for him, were still there. But the price was clear now. If he wanted to save her, he would have to give up everything. The phone rang one final time. He answered it, his voice breaking as he spoke. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And with that, the phone went silent. Months had passed since Eli's final encounter with the phone. His life had returned to some semblance of normalcy, though the scars of his past still haunted him. He had left his old town, moved to a different city, and tried to start over. He no longer thought about the phone, no longer heard its whispers in the dark corners of his mind. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he would remember the visions of Maya's smiling face, the desperate feeling of being too late, the price of his choices. He had made peace with the fact that he couldn't change the past, but the burden of his guilt was something he would carry forever. One evening, as he walked home from work, he passed by an old pawn shop that he had never noticed before. Something about the place felt wrong. The windows were dusty, the sign faded, but there was a strange pull, a force drawing him toward it. He hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of him. He stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and metal. Shelves lined the walls, filled with items that looked as though they had been forgotten by time. Old books, tarnished jewelry, strange trinkets. But it was something on the counter that caught his eye. It was a phone, the same phone, the one he had destroyed. His heart skipped a beat. The phone was sitting there, perfectly intact, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. Eli's breath caught in his throat as he reached out to touch it, his fingers trembling. They had destroyed it, thrown it away. How could it be here? Before he could stop himself, he picked it up. The moment his fingers made contact, the screen flickered to life. A message appeared. You thought you could escape. The phone was back in his hands, and with it, the curse. Eli felt the familiar weight of it, the sense of being trapped, of being watched. The phone had found him again, and this time, it wasn't just about Maya. It was about something else, something worse. He couldn't throw it away. He couldn't destroy it. He knew that now. The phone had a life of its own, and once it had chosen someone, there was no escaping it. Eli tried to leave the pawn shop, but the owner, an elderly man with a haggard face, blocked his path. You shouldn't have touched it, the man said, his voice low and raspy. It's cursed, boy. It always finds its way back. Eli felt a chill run down his spine. He had to get out. He had to leave the shop and never look back. But as he turned to leave, the phone buzzed again. There is still time to save them. Eli froze. Them? The message was clear. The phone had moved on. It wasn't just haunting him anymore. It had found someone else. Back at his apartment, Eli sat on the floor, the cursed phone in his hands. He didn't know who the phone had chosen next, but he knew that whoever it was would be just as doomed as he had been. The phone didn't care about him anymore. It had found its next victim, someone new to manipulate, someone new to destroy. His mind raced as he thought back to the pawn shop owner's words. It always finds its way back. The phone was relentless, and it never stopped. It always found someone to latch onto, someone to torment, someone to ruin. Eli knew he had to stop it. He had to break the cycle. But how? Every attempt to destroy the phone had failed. Every attempt to escape had failed. And now, the phone was showing him something new, a name. Her name is Emily. Eli's blood ran cold. He didn't know an Emily, but he could feel the weight of the name. He could feel the phone's influence, pushing him toward her, pulling him into the next phase of its curse. He had to find her. He had to warn her. Emily was a college student, a bright young woman who lived in the same city as Eli. She had no idea that her life was about to be turned upside down by the same cursed phone that had ruined Eli's life. It started innocently enough. She found the phone one day in a coffee shop, abandoned on a table. She had no reason to think twice about it. It was an old model, cracked screen and all, but she picked it up, figuring someone had left it behind. She turned it on, and that's when the messages began. At first, they were simple, cryptic, but harmless. But as the days passed, the messages grew more intense. They showed her images of her friends, her family, and strangers, all with dark, unsettling futures. The phone seemed to know things it shouldn't, things that no one could possibly know. One night, she received a message that made her blood run cold. "You will be next." The phone screen flashed, and a new message appeared. "You are the one I've chosen." Emily tried to ignore it, tried to pretend that it was just some weird glitch or prank. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The phone wasn't just showing her visions. It was controlling her, guiding her towards something she couldn't understand. Eli couldn't let this happen again. He couldn't let the phone destroy another life. He had to stop it once and for all. But how? He tracked down Emily, following the trail of the phone's messages, and finally found her one evening at a local diner. She was sitting alone, staring at the phone in her hands, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Emily," Eli said softly, sitting down across from her. "You don't know me, but I need to warn you." Her eyes widened in fear as she looked at him. "How do you know my name?" Eli swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you have to get rid of that phone. It's cursed. It's going to ruin your life, just like it ruined mine." She shook her head, confused and scared. "I don't understand. What do you mean?" Eli leaned in closer, his voice urgent. "The phone, it controls you. It shows you the future, but it's not the future you want. It's the future it wants. And if you don't stop it now, it will destroy you, just like it destroyed me." Emily looked down at the phone, her fingers trembling. "I don't know what to do." Eli's eyes darkened. "There's only one way to stop it. You have to destroy it. You have to break the cycle." But before he could say more, the phone buzzed again, its screen lighting up with a new message. It's too late. The phone was gone, but its curse remained. Eli watched as Emily's life began to unravel, just as his had. He had tried to warn her, tried to save her, but in the end, the phone had already chosen its next victim. The cycle was endless, the curse unbreakable. And somewhere, in the shadows, the phone waited for the next person to stumble across it, to answer its call. And the cycle would begin again. After Eli's warning, Emily tried to resist the pull of the phone. She knew it was bad, knew it was dangerous, but the more she tried to distance herself from it, the more it consumed her thoughts. The phone buzzed constantly, like a persistent voice in her head, urging her to look, to listen, to follow its commands. She couldn't stop herself. It was as though the phone had become an extension of her own mind, a constant presence she couldn't escape. One night, Emily received a new message. "You cannot run from what you are." She had tried everything, turning it off, throwing it in the trash, even leaving it at a random street corner, but the phone always found its way back to her. It was relentless. The visions were getting worse. The phone no longer just showed her images of people she knew. Now, it showed her horrific, twisted scenes, people screaming, people dying, people she had never met, but somehow she felt connected to them. It was as though the phone was showing her every death it had ever caused, every soul it had ever claimed. And then one night, the phone displayed something that made her blood run cold. "You will die next." Emily froze. The words weren't just a warning, they were a promise. Eli had been keeping an eye on Emily from a distance, his guilt gnawing at him. He had tried to save her. But now he realized that the phone's curse wasn't just a matter of warnings or messages. It was a parasite, feeding off fear, off despair, and it could never truly be stopped. Once it had chosen someone, it would not let go. Eli's thoughts were consumed by the phone's power. He had tried to destroy it, but it always came back. The cycle never ended, and now he could see the same thing happening to Emily. She was slipping into the same spiral of fear, isolation, and despair that had consumed him. He couldn't let it happen again. He had to do something, anything, to break the cycle. One night, Eli sat in his apartment, staring at the cursed phone. He had been receiving strange messages himself, though he hadn't dared open them for weeks. But now he had no choice. He had to know if there was something, anything, that could stop the curse. He had to find a way to break it. With trembling hands, he opened the phone. The screen flickered to life, and a new message appeared. You cannot escape what you have already chosen. Eli's heart sank. He knew what that meant. The phone wasn't just a tool, it was a force. A malevolent entity that had chosen him long ago, and now it had chosen Emily. There was no escape. Emily had reached her breaking point. The phone had consumed her every waking thought. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. It was always there, buzzing, whispering, showing her things that weren't real, things that were real, things that would happen, things that had happened. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred. And then one night, the phone buzzed one last time. It's time. Emily felt the cold grip of inevitability wash over her. She had known this moment was coming. The phone had been leading her here, pulling her into its grasp. She had tried to fight it, but now she realized that there was no fighting it. The phone was not just a cursed object. It was a part of her, a part of everyone it touched. It was an extension of their fear, their guilt, their pain. The phone rang. Emily answered. You're ready. Eli had been tracking Emily's descent, and when he received the message that she had finally answered the phone, he knew it was too late. There was nothing he could do to stop it. The phone had won. But there was something else. Something dark. Something he hadn't realized before. The phone wasn't just about tormenting the victim. It was about feeding off them, using them to fuel its endless cycle of horror. Eli had to make a choice. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. The phone had taken everything from him, his friends, his family, his peace of mind. But now, it was offering him something else, a chance to end it. The phone buzzed again, and a message appeared. If you want to stop it, you must become the next vessel. Eli's hands shook as he read the words. The phone was offering him a way out, but at a price. He could end the curse, stop it from claiming more lives, but it would cost him everything. He would become the new conduit, the new victim, the new keeper of the phone's dark power. He didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone, his fingers trembling. I accept. The next morning, Eli was gone. His apartment was empty, the phone lying on the floor, silent. The world moved on, unaware of the dark bargain that had been struck. But somewhere, in the shadows, the phone waited. It waited for the next person to stumble upon it, the next soul to answer its call. It waited for the next cycle to begin. And so it went. The phone, with its endless hunger, would never stop. It would always find someone to claim, someone to twist, someone to destroy. The curse would continue, as it always had, as it always would. And somewhere, in the darkness, a new victim would hear the phone's buzz. You are next. Years later, a young woman named Sarah walked into the same pawn shop where Eli had found the cursed phone. She was looking for something to fill the emptiness inside her, a distraction from the weight of her life. The shop was dimly lit, the shelves cluttered with forgotten objects. But something caught her eye, a phone, old and cracked, sitting on the counter. Without thinking, she picked it up. The screen flickered to life. You are next. And so, the cycle began again. Sarah had no idea what she was walking into when she stepped into the pawn shop that day. She was just looking for something to fill the void in her life, something to distract her from the chaos of her world. She had been dealing with a lot, recently losing her job, her relationships falling apart, and an overwhelming sense of loneliness that she couldn't shake. The phone, old and cracked, sat on the counter like a forgotten relic. It wasn't particularly appealing. Its screen was scratched, the casing chipped, but there was something about it that caught Sarah's attention. It felt important, as though it had been waiting for her. The pawn shop owner, an older man with tired eyes, didn't seem to notice her hesitation. He was busy cleaning an old lamp on the shelf. "That one's a bit strange," he said absently, not looking up from his task. "But it's yours if you want it." Sarah didn't question his words. She reached for the phone, feeling a strange pull as her fingers brushed against it. The moment she touched it, the phone buzzed softly, as if waking from a long slumber. She glanced at the man, but he seemed oblivious to the phone's strange behavior. With a shrug, Sarah paid for the phone and left the shop, the weight of it in her hand feeling heavier than it should. That night, as Sarah sat in her dimly lit apartment, she powered on the phone. The screen flickered, revealing a simple message. "You are next." She laughed nervously, dismissing it as a glitch or some kind of prank. But then, the phone buzzed again. The message changed. "You cannot escape." Her laughter died in her throat. The screen was black for a moment, and then a new message appeared. "The cycle has begun." Sarah felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She tried to turn the phone off, but it wouldn't respond. The messages kept coming, faster now, each one more cryptic than the last. She tried to throw the phone away, but the next morning, it was back on her nightstand, as if it had never left. The phone didn't just send messages, it showed her things. Horrible, terrifying things. At first, the visions were distant, like flashes of images from a dream. She saw faces, people she didn't recognize, twisted in pain, their eyes wide with terror. She saw dark figures moving in the shadows, their forms shifting and changing, as if they were something otherworldly. She saw her own reflection, but it wasn't her face, it was someone else's. Someone with hollow eyes, someone who had already been consumed by the curse. The phone buzzed again. This is only the beginning. Sarah's hands shook as she tried to put the phone down, but it wouldn't leave her. She could feel its presence, its weight, like a shadow lurking just behind her. No matter how far she ran, no matter how hard she tried to escape, it followed her. And then, the final message appeared. "You will be the next victim." The more Sarah researched, the more she learned about the phone. There were no clear answers, just rumors and whispers. People who had owned it before had mysteriously disappeared, or worse, had been found dead under strange circumstances. The phone, it seemed, had a history of tormenting its owners, driving them to madness, showing them things that weren't real, or perhaps things that were. She found an old blog post, written by someone who claimed to have survived the curse. It was filled with cryptic warnings, but one line stood out to her. "The phone is a vessel for something ancient, something evil." Sarah couldn't understand what that meant, but she had to find out. She had to understand how the phone worked, why it had chosen her, and if there was any way to stop it. Her search led her to an obscure book in a local library. The book was old, its pages yellowed and fragile. It was filled with stories of curses, spirits, and ancient rituals. But one chapter stood out: the phone of despair. The phone was not just an object. It was a conduit, a vessel for an ancient entity that thrived on fear, guilt, and pain. The entity used the phone to manipulate its victims, showing them twisted visions of the future, of death, of loss. It fed on their despair, growing stronger with each victim it claimed. Sarah's heart pounded as she read. The curse had been passed down for generations, always finding new victims, always feeding, always growing. There was no escape. As Sarah delved deeper into the origins of the phone, she began to notice something strange. The visions weren't just random. They were connected to her. The faces, the places, the events, they all seemed familiar, like memories she hadn't lived yet. It was as if the phone was showing her her own future, or perhaps the future it had already decided for her. And then one night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, it was a call. The phone screen displayed a distorted, twisted version of her own face. The eyes were hollow, the skin pale, the expression one of pure terror. "You are the key. the voice on the other end whispered. "You are the one who will break the cycle." Sarah's heart raced. Break the cycle? Could it be possible? Could she actually stop the phone from claiming her? The voice continued. "But the price will be high. You must sacrifice what you hold dear." The phone went silent, the screen flickering before going black. Sarah sat there, frozen. What did the voice mean? What would she have to sacrifice? Was there any way to escape the curse without losing everything? The next few days were a blur of fear and uncertainty. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the phone's message. What was the price? What would she have to give up to break the cycle? She tried to resist, tried to ignore the phone, but it wouldn't let her. The messages grew more insistent, more urgent. She saw more faces, some familiar, some not, and each one filled her with dread. She saw herself, standing in a dark room, alone, with the phone in her hands. She saw her friends and family, their faces twisted in agony. And then, one final message appeared. The time has come. You must choose. Sarah stood in the center of her apartment, the phone in her hands. The air was thick with tension, and she could feel the presence of the entity watching her, waiting for her decision. She knew that whatever choice she made, it would come with a price. If she wanted to break the cycle, to stop the phone from tormenting others, she would have to sacrifice something precious. But what? Could she give up her family, her friends, her life? The phone buzzed one last time. The price is your soul. Sarah's heart pounded. The phone was offering her a way out, but it was clear now. There was no escape without a cost. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt the weight of the phone lift from her hands. The curse was not hers to break. The cycle would continue, and she would have to live with the consequences. The phone sat on the counter, waiting for the next person to find it. Sarah had made her choice. The cycle had continued, and the phone would always find someone new, someone to torment, someone to break. And somewhere in the shadows, the phone waited. The curse was eternal. The price would always be paid. After Sarah's decision to not give in completely to the phone's demands, she thought she might find some peace. But instead, the darkness seemed to grow stronger. The phone had stopped buzzing, but its presence lingered like a shadow in the corner of her mind. It whispered in her dreams, showed her fleeting images of people she didn't know, of places she had never been, but somehow felt intimately connected to. She couldn't shake the feeling that the phone was watching her, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to break. One evening, as Sarah sat in her living room, trying to distract herself with a book, the phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. It was no longer just a warning or a command. It was a plea. Help us. Her heart raced. She stared at the screen, unsure of what to make of it. The phone had never asked for help before. It had only taken. It had only demanded. But now it seemed vulnerable. The message blinked on the screen, the words seeming to echo in her mind. Help us. Break the cycle. Set us free. The message was followed by another image, a distorted, half-formed face, a woman with hollow eyes, her mouth open in silent screams. Sarah recoiled, but there was something about the face that seemed familiar, as though she had seen it before. It was a face that haunted her dreams, a face that felt like it belonged to someone she should know. Determined to understand what was happening, Sarah turned to the library again. This time, she searched for anything that could explain the phone's origins. She found an old, tattered journal hidden in the back of the library's archives, its pages yellowed and fragile. The journal was written by someone named Evelyn Carter, a woman who had lived in the early 1900s. The journal detailed Evelyn's descent into madness after she had found the cursed phone. According to the journal, the phone was created by a group of occultists who had discovered a way to channel dark, malevolent energy into a physical object. The phone was meant to be a vessel, a conduit for an ancient and powerful entity that thrived on fear, despair, and suffering. The phone wasn't just a tool. It was alive, a sentient being that could manipulate its victims, feeding on their emotions, drawing them deeper into its grip with each passing day. But there was more. The journal also described a ritual, a way to break the cycle. It wasn't a simple task. The phone's power could only be severed by someone who had already been marked by it. The ritual required a sacrifice, one that could either save the victim or doom them forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she read. The ritual seemed impossible, and yet it was the only hope she had. She could feel the phone's presence growing stronger, its pull more insistent. The phone wasn't just after her soul, it wanted her to be its vessel, to carry its curse forward into the next generation. But Evelyn's journal hinted at something else. The entity wasn't the only thing trapped inside the phone. There were others too. Victims who had been consumed by the curse, their souls bound to the phone, forever trapped within its dark power. As Sarah's research deepened, she began to experience the phone's power more intensely. The visions came more frequently, and the lines between the real world and the horrors the phone showed her blurred. She saw faces, strange, twisted faces, people who had been consumed by the phone's power, their bodies distorted and decayed. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the phone rang. It wasn't just a buzz or a notification. It was a full-blown call. Her heart raced as she answered, unsure of what to expect. The voice on the other end was not the same as before. This time, it was soft, pleading, almost desperate. "Please, help us." It was the voice of the woman from the vision, the one with hollow eyes. Her voice trembled, as if she were barely holding on to her sanity. "I was once like you, trapped, in the phone." The voice continued. "I tried to break the cycle, but it consumed me. It will consume you too, if you don't stop it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The voice sounded so real, so full of pain. "You must destroy the phone, or it will destroy you. There is no other way." The line went dead, and Sarah was left in silence, the weight of the phone heavy in her hands. Sarah knew what she had to do. The ritual described in Evelyn's journal was the only way to break the curse, to free the souls trapped inside the phone. But it was risky. The ritual required her to sacrifice something precious, something she wasn't sure she could live without. The instructions were clear. She needed to perform the ritual at midnight, in a place where the phone's power was strongest, where it had first been found. She would need a specific set of items, including a lock of her own hair, a personal item of someone she loved, and a symbol of the phone's power, a piece of the phone itself. As Sarah gathered the necessary items, she felt a sense of dread settle over her. She wasn't sure what would happen during the ritual, but she knew one thing for certain. The phone would not let her go easily. At midnight, Sarah stood in the center of her apartment, the phone in front of her. The ritual had begun. She recited the incantation from Evelyn's journal, her voice trembling as she spoke the ancient words. The air grew cold, and the phone began to hum, its screen flickering with an eerie light. Suddenly, the phone's screen exploded with visions, images of people, of faces, of places she had never seen but somehow knew. She saw herself, her body twisted and decayed, her soul consumed by the curse. She saw her loved ones, their faces contorted in agony, their bodies decaying, as if the phone had already claimed them. The air around her thickened, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around her like dark tendrils. The phone's power was overwhelming, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might lose herself to it. But then, as she reached the final words of the ritual, the phone cracked, its screen shattering into 1,000 pieces. The room was filled with a deafening silence. The phone's power was broken. The curse was lifted, but Sarah knew that the victory came at a price. The phone, now destroyed, no longer haunted her. The souls trapped inside it were freed, their torment ended. But Sarah felt hollow, as though a part of her had been taken in the process. She had sacrificed something precious, her innocence, her peace, her understanding of the world. She had faced the darkness and survived. But at what cost? As she stood over the broken pieces of the phone, Sarah realized that the cycle might be over for her, but it would never truly end. The phone had been destroyed, but the curse would always linger, waiting for the next victim, the next person desperate enough to answer its call. And somewhere, in the shadows, The phone's dark power waited to be reborn. In the days following the destruction of the phone, Sarah thought she had finally escaped its grip. The nightmares that once plagued her had faded, and the sense of dread that had been a constant companion for so long seemed to have lifted. She resumed her normal life, slowly rebuilding the pieces of herself that the phone had torn apart. She began seeing her friends again, repairing the relationships that had suffered during her ordeal. She even started dating again, something she hadn't been able to bring herself to do while the phone had controlled her every thought. Life, it seemed, was returning to normal. But something was wrong. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It was subtle at first, an occasional glance over her shoulder, a fleeting shadow in her peripheral vision. She told herself it was just paranoia, a side effect of everything she had gone through. But the unease gnawed at her, a constant reminder that the curse might not be over after all. One evening, as Sarah sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, she received a notification. It was from an unknown number. "We know what you did." Her blood ran cold. The message was simple, but it hit her like a punch to the gut. She had destroyed the phone, but had she truly broken the curse? Or had it simply found a new way to reach her? The next morning, Sarah woke to find something strange. The phone she had destroyed, the cursed phone, was sitting on her kitchen counter, as if it had never been broken. The shattered screen, the cracked casing, everything was in place, as if the phone had been magically repaired. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The phone felt cold, heavier than before. She could feel its dark energy pulsing beneath her fingertips, its malevolent presence seeping into her mind. The screen flickered to life, and a new message appeared. The cycle never ends. Sarah's heart raced. She had thought she was free. She had thought she had broken the curse. But now, it was clear, the phone had never truly been destroyed. It had simply been waiting for her to lower her guard, waiting for her to think the nightmare was over. As Sarah grappled with the reality that the curse was far from over, she began to notice something else. The phone wasn't just tormenting her, it was reaching out to others. People in her life began to receive strange messages, just as she had. Friends, family members, even strangers she had spoken to in passing. Each one was drawn into the phone's web, each one marked by the curse. Her best friend, Emily, was the first to fall victim. She had been skeptical of Sarah's warnings, dismissing the phone as nothing more than a bizarre coincidence. But now, Emily was receiving the same messages Sarah had once received. The phone's dark influence spread, and Emily began to experience the same visions, the same terrifying dreams. Sarah tried to warn her, tried to tell her how to break free, but it was too late. Emily had already been consumed by the phone's power, her soul bound to its dark force. "Help me," Emily had whispered through the phone one night, her voice trembling with fear. "It's too late for me, but you can still save yourself." The message was clear. Sarah was the only one who could break the cycle. But how? How could she possibly save herself and the others when the phone's power was so overwhelming? Determined to find an answer, Sarah returned to the library, scouring the archives for any information that could help her understand the phone's true origins. This time, she focused on the occultist group mentioned in Evelyn's journal, the group that had created the phone. She needed to know more about them, about their rituals, and about the entity they had summoned into the phone. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. The occultists had not just created the phone, they had used it to bind an ancient, malevolent spirit to the physical world. The entity was known as Ashera, a being of pure darkness, capable of manipulating time and space, feeding on the fears and souls of those it touched. The phone was its prison, its vessel, but it was also a means of escape, a way for Ashera to influence the world beyond the phone, to claim new victims and grow stronger. The occultists had thought they could control Ashera, but they had underestimated its power. One by one, they had fallen, consumed by the very entity they had sought to control. Now, the phone had a new purpose, to find a new host, a new victim to continue the cycle. And that victim was Sarah. The more Sarah learned, the more she realized that there was no simple way out. The curse wasn't just about the phone. It was about the entity inside it, the malevolent force that had been feeding on the souls of its victims for centuries. The phone was just a tool, a means for Ishera to reach out and claim new souls. Sarah had thought she could destroy the phone, but in doing so, she had only delayed the inevitable. The curse was bound to her now, and no matter how hard she tried to escape, it would always find a way back. The visions grew stronger. The faces of the curse began to appear in her dreams, their hollow eyes pleading for release. They whispered to her, telling her that the only way to truly break the cycle was to confront Ishera itself, to face the entity in its true form and destroy it once and for all. But how could she fight something so powerful? How could she defeat an ancient being that had survived for centuries, feeding on the fears and souls of its victims? In a desperate bid to end the curse, Sarah sought out the help of an occult expert, someone who had studied the dark arts and understood the nature of spirits like Ishera. The expert, a man named Vincent, had spent years researching ancient entities and their influence on the physical world. He had heard of Ishera before, but he had never encountered it in person. Together, they devised a plan, a ritual to banish Ishera from the phone once and for all. It would require everything Sarah had, her strength, her will, and her very soul. The ritual would take place at the stroke of midnight, in a place where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were thinnest. As the ritual began, the phone came to life, its screen flickering with visions of the entity, its dark form writhing in the shadows. Ishera's voice filled the room, a low, guttural whisper that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "You cannot defeat me," the voice hissed. "I am eternal. I am the darkness that has always existed." But Sarah didn't falter. She had come too far, endured too much. He recited the incantation, her voice steady, even as the room seemed to close in around her. The shadows grew thicker, more oppressive, but she held on. The phone shattered once more, its screen cracking and splintering as Ishera's presence began to fade. The air grew still, and the oppressive weight that had hung over Sarah for so long began to lift. But as the final words of the ritual were spoken, Sarah felt a sharp pain in her chest. She gasped for breath, her vision blurring. The curse had taken its toll. She had defeated Ishera, but in doing so, she had paid the ultimate price. Sarah woke in a darkened room, the phone nowhere to be found. The curse had been lifted, but at a great cost. She was no longer the same person. The phone had taken something from her, something she could never get back. The world seemed quieter now, as if the weight of the curse had been lifted from it. Sarah had broken the cycle, but the scars of her journey would remain with her forever. The phone and the entity it had contained were gone, but the memories of the horrors she had faced would never fade. And as Sarah walked out into the world, she knew one thing for certain. Darkness would always be lurking, waiting for the next victim to answer the call. Months passed since Sarah had completed the ritual to banish Ishera. She had tried to return to her life, to find some semblance of peace, but the weight of what she had experienced hung over her like a constant shadow. Though the phone had been destroyed, though Ishera's malevolent presence had faded, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her. Her friends had moved on, unaware of the true horror she had faced. They saw her as the same Sarah they had known before, but Sarah felt like a stranger in her own skin. The trauma of the curse had changed her in ways she couldn't explain. Every time she picked up her phone, every time she saw a strange notification or a new message from an unknown number, her heart would race. She couldn't help but wonder, was it over? Or was the phone simply waiting, biding its time for the next victim? One evening, as Sarah walked home from work, she passed a small secondhand store she had never noticed before. Its dusty windows and cluttered shelves seemed to call out to her, an eerie pull that she couldn't ignore. Her feet carried her inside, her heart pounding as she crossed the threshold. The store was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten things. As she wandered deeper into the aisles, her eyes were drawn to a shelf at the back of the store. There, among a collection of old phones, was a familiar object, a phone that looked exactly like the one she had destroyed. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. It was impossible. The phone was different, though. It was newer, sleeker, more modern, but there was no mistaking it. The cursed phone was back. Somehow, it had returned. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the phone. Her fingers hovered over it. The temptation to touch it almost overwhelming. But she pulled her hand back, shaking her head. She couldn't. She had already fought too hard to escape its grip. But as she turned to leave, she heard a voice behind her. "It's a good one, isn't it?" the voice said, low and gravelly. Sarah spun around to find an elderly man standing behind her. His clothes were worn and tattered, his eyes dark and hollow. He was the shopkeeper, and he smiled at her with an unsettling grin. "That phone has a history," he continued, his voice dripping with a strange kind of knowing. "A very long history." Sarah froze. How did he know? How did he know about the phone? She had never told anyone the full story, never shared the details of the curse. Yet this man seemed to know everything. "You've felt its power, haven't you?" the shopkeeper said, stepping closer. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." Sarah's skin crawled as the man's words sank in. He was right. She wasn't the first person to fall victim to the phone, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. The curse was far from over. It had simply found a new vessel. Before she could respond, the shopkeeper turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the store. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the phone once more. She had to stop it. She couldn't let this cycle continue. Determined to stop the curse once and for all, Sarah returned to the library. She had to learn more about the origins of the phone, about the dark forces that had created it. The knowledge she had uncovered before had been enough to break the phone's grip on her, but now she needed more. She needed to understand how the curse could be eradicated completely. As she pored over the ancient texts, she came across a disturbing revelation. The phone was not just a tool of evil. It was part of something much larger, a network of cursed objects that spanned centuries. The occultists who had created the phone were not the only ones who had sought to bind spirits to physical objects. There were others, other groups, other individuals who had created similar devices, each one designed to capture a different entity, a different piece of darkness. The phone was just one link in a chain of cursed objects, and as long as those objects existed, the cycle would continue. Ishera was gone, but the entity had not been destroyed. It had merely been displaced, forced into a new form. The phone was a vessel, yes, but it was also a key that unlocked the door to other dark forces. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the truth. The curse wasn't just about the phone, it was about the network of cursed objects, each one waiting for a new victim, a new soul to claim. Sarah knew that she couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed help. Someone who understood the true nature of the cursed objects and could help her destroy them once and for all. She reached out to Vincent, the occult expert who had helped her before. Together, they began researching the network of cursed objects, tracking down any leads that might lead them to the source of the curse. Their search took them across the country, from old libraries to abandoned buildings, from hidden underground vaults to forgotten temples. They uncovered clues, ancient symbols, and dark rituals, each one pointing to a central figure, the one who had created the network of cursed objects in the first place. This figure was known only as the Collector, a mysterious and powerful individual who had spent centuries amassing cursed artifacts. The Collector was said to be immortal, having bound his own soul to the objects he collected, using them to extend his life and increase his power. The phone was just one of many items in his collection, each one more dangerous than the last. Sarah and Vincent tracked the Collector to a remote mansion, hidden deep in the forest. It was a place of dark energy, a place where the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds was. Then, they knew that if they were to destroy the network of cursed objects, they would have to confront the Collector himself. The mansion was a labyrinth of shadowy corridors and hidden rooms, each one filled with cursed artifacts. Sarah and Vincent moved cautiously through the house, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with dark energy. As they ventured deeper into the mansion, They found themselves face to face with the collector. He was an imposing figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. He smiled as he saw them, his lips curling into a sinister grin. "You've come to destroy my collection," the collector said, his voice smooth and mocking. "But you cannot. These objects are part of me. They're my life, my power." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that this would be the final confrontation, the moment when everything would either end or spiral into darkness once again. The battle was fierce, the air crackling with dark energy as Sarah and Vincent faced off against the collector. He wielded the power of the cursed objects, summoning shadows and spirits to fight on his behalf. But Sarah was determined. She had already faced the horrors of the phone, and she would not let this curse continue to claim more lives. In the end, it was Sarah's will that proved stronger. She used the knowledge she had gained, the rituals she had learned, and the strength she had found within herself to break the collector's hold on the cursed objects. With one final, desperate push, she shattered the network of cursed items, banishing the collector and his dark power forever. As the mansion crumbled around them, Sarah and Vincent made their escape, the curse finally broken. The world was free from the grip of the cursed objects, and Sarah could finally breathe easy. But as she walked away from the wreckage, she couldn't shake the feeling that evil was never truly gone. It was just waiting for the next person to make the wrong choice. Sarah had broken the cycle, destroyed the network of cursed objects, and freed countless souls from their torment. But she knew that evil would always find a way to return. It was a part of the world, a shadow that could never be fully erased. As she moved on with her life, Sarah kept a careful watch, knowing that the next dark force could be waiting just around the corner. The phone, the cursed objects, and the collector were gone, but the darkness was always lurking, waiting for the next person to answer its call. And somewhere, in the distance, the whispers of the cursed objects began to stir once more. It had been over a year since Sarah and Vincent had destroyed the collector and shattered the network of cursed objects. Sarah had tried to rebuild her life, finding some semblance of normalcy after everything she had endured. She moved into a new apartment, started a new job, and even began to trust people again. But the darkness was never far from her mind. Every time she walked past a store that sold old phones, every time she saw a strange notification or an unknown number on her screen, her heart would race. She had learned to ignore the feeling, to convince herself that the nightmare was over. But deep down, she knew better. One night, as Sarah sat in her apartment, reading a book, she heard a knock at the door. It was late, too late for anyone to be visiting. Hesitant, she walked to the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there, but on the ground in front of her door was a small, black box. It was unmarked, with no indication of who had left it. Sarah's stomach turned as she bent down to pick it up. The box was cold to the touch, and as she opened it, she found something that made her blood run cold. A phone. The phone was identical to the one she had destroyed, the cursed phone. But this time, it was pristine, untouched by the damage it had suffered before. It was as if it had never been broken. Sarah's mind raced. How could this be? She had destroyed the network, defeated the collector. She had broken the curse. So, why was the phone here? Why was it back? Sarah immediately knew what she had to do. She couldn't let this phone control her again. She couldn't let the cycle repeat itself. But as she reached for the phone, she felt a cold, suffocating presence in the room. The air grew thick with an oppressive energy, and she could feel the shadows closing in around her. The phone's screen flickered to life, and a message appeared. You cannot escape. The words were simple, but they sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was as if the phone was mocking her, reminding her that the curse was never truly broken. The darkness had merely been waiting, biding its time. Before she could react, the phone vibrated, and another message appeared. It's not over, Sarah. The cycle continues. Sarah felt her knees weaken as the weight of the message settled in. She had thought she had destroyed the phone, thought she had ended the curse once and for all. But now, It seemed that the phone had found a way to return, to find a new host, a new victim. Days passed, and Sarah became consumed by the phone's presence. She couldn't escape it. The phone was everywhere, on her desk at work, on her kitchen counter, even in her dreams. It was as if the phone had a mind of its own, following her, tormenting her, reminding her that the curse had never been truly broken. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. This time, when she opened it, there was no box, no mysterious phone. Instead, a man stood before her. He was tall, with dark hair and an unsettling smile. His eyes gleamed with a cold, predatory light. He was dressed in a dark suit, as if he had just stepped out of a shadow, and in his hand, he held something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the phone. "You've been expecting me," the man said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "I'm the new collector." Sarah's heart raced. She had heard of the collector, the man who had created the network of cursed objects. But this man was different. He wasn't the same as the one she had defeated. This was a new force, a new embodiment of the curse. "You thought you destroyed the curse," the man continued, his smile widening. "But the darkness never truly leaves. It only waits for the right moment to return. And now, it's time for the cycle to begin again." Sarah's mind raced as she realized the truth. The collector had been more than just a person. He had been a manifestation of the curse itself, a vessel for the dark force that had created the network of cursed objects. And now, the curse had found a new host, a new collector to carry on its legacy. The man, the new collector, stepped into Sarah's apartment without invitation, his presence overwhelming. He seemed to fill the room with an aura of darkness, his very being a manifestation of the curse that had haunted Sarah for so long. "You've tried to break the cycle," the new collector said, his voice dripping with contempt. "But you can't. The curse will always find a way back. The darkness is eternal, and you will never be free of it." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of a way to stop him, to break the curse once and for all. But she knew, deep down, that there was no easy solution. The phone, the network of cursed objects, the collector, it was all part of something much larger, something beyond her understanding. "I can't stop it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've tried. I've done everything I can." The new collector laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "You never had a chance, Sarah. The darkness is part of the world. It always has been, and it always will be." As the new collector moved closer, Sarah realized that she was facing a choice. She could fight, but she knew that the darkness would always return. Or she could accept it, embrace it, and become part of the curse herself. The phone on the table vibrated again, and a new message appeared. "Join us, Sarah. Become one with the darkness. The cycle will never end, but you can control it." Sarah stood frozen, torn between the two paths. The curse had consumed her life for so long, had taken so much from her. She had fought to break free, but now it seemed that the darkness was inescapable. "Join me," the new collector said, holding out the phone. "Become the next collector. It's your destiny." But Sarah knew that if she accepted, she would be giving in to the darkness. She would become part of the curse, a vessel for its power, forever bound to the phone and the evil it contained. With a sudden burst of clarity, Sarah made her decision. She grabbed the phone from the table, holding it tightly in her hands. "No!" The new collector's smile faltered. "You can't escape." Sarah's fingers moved quickly, pressing a sequence of buttons she had learned during her previous battles with the curse. The phone flickered, the screen flashing with violent energy. For a moment, it seemed as though the darkness would consume her once again. But then, with a final surge of power, Sarah shattered the phone in her hands, the darkness dissipating in a burst of light. The new collector screamed, his form flickering like a shadow before he vanished completely. Sarah stood alone in her apartment, the remnants of the phone scattered at her feet. The curse had been broken once again, but at what cost? The darkness had been vanquished, but Sarah knew that it would always find a way back. As she stood there, breathing heavily, she realized that the battle was never truly over. The curse would always be a part of her life, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next moment of weakness. But for now, at least she was free. With one last look at the shattered remnants of the phone, Sarah walked out of her apartment, ready to face whatever the future held. The darkness may return, but she would always be ready to fight. Years later, Sarah would look back on the events that had shaped her life. She had fought the curse, defeated the collector, and broken the cycle more times than she could count. But she knew that evil was never truly gone. It was always waiting, lurking in the shadows, ready to return. And somewhere in the distance, a new phone would ring, calling out to the next victim. Months passed since Sarah's final confrontation with the new collector. She had shattered the cursed phone, severing its hold on her once again, but the victory felt hollow. Though the darkness had been vanquished, Sarah could not shake the feeling that it was only a temporary reprieve. The weight of the curse still lingered in her mind, a constant reminder that she had never truly been free. Her life, which had once seemed to be returning to normal, was now marred by a creeping unease. Every time she picked up her phone, she wondered if it would be the one to bring the darkness back. Every time she looked into a stranger's eyes, she wondered if they were the next victim of the curse. The shadows of the past had taken root in her mind, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore them, they were always there, lurking just beneath the surface. One evening, as Sarah sat in her apartment, a knock at the door broke her reverie. She wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitant, she stood and walked to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. When she opened it, she found a man standing on the threshold. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. He held out a small, black box, identical to the one that had contained the cursed phone all those months ago. "I'm sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice calm but unervingly flat. "But I think you've dropped this." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the box in his hands. He hadn't dropped anything. She hadn't seen him before. And yet, there he was, standing at her door with the same box that had appeared before. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man's lips curled into a thin smile. "Just someone who knows what you've been through." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, the box still in her hands. Her heart raced as she stared at it. She knew what it was. She knew what it meant. The curse was back. The box sat on Sarah's kitchen counter for days, untouched. She couldn't bring herself to open it, to confront whatever nightmare it contained. But the longer she left it there, the more it seemed to call to her, pulling her closer. The curse was not finished with her. It had returned, and this time, it was more insidious, more subtle than before. As Sarah sat in her apartment, staring at the box, she began to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Her phone, which had sat quietly on the table, suddenly vibrated, its screen lighting up with a new message. "It's time." The words sent a chill down her spine. She knew what it meant. The phone had returned, and the curse was once again in control. But this time, it wasn't just a simple phone. It was something more, a force that had evolved, grown stronger with each passing cycle. Sarah knew she couldn't fight it alone. She had to find someone who could help her, someone who understood the true nature of the curse and could help her break it once and for all. But as she reached for the phone to call Vincent, her fingers brushed against something cold and hard. The box. It had opened on its own. Inside, the phone lay pristine and glowing. But it wasn't just a phone this time. Surrounding it were symbols, ancient, cryptic runes that seemed to shift and writhe in the dim light of the room. The curse had changed. It was no longer just a phone. It was a portal, a doorway to something far darker. Sarah's pulse quickened as she stared at the phone. The symbols on the screen began to glow brighter, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She could feel the darkness growing, expanding, reaching out to her. The phone was no longer just a tool. It was an anchor, binding her to something far worse than she had ever imagined. Suddenly, the phone rang. A chilling, distorted sound filled the room. like the ringing of a bell from a distant, forgotten place. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she reached for the phone, her fingers trembling. She had no choice but to answer it. She had to know what was happening, what this new phase of the curse meant. When she pressed the screen, the voice on the other end was familiar, but wrong. Sarah. The voice was a low, guttural whisper, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. It was the voice of the new collector, but it was more than that. It was something else entirely, something ancient, something beyond human comprehension. You thought you could escape, the voice continued, growing louder, more insistent. But the curse has only just begun. You're mine now, Sarah, forever. The phone screen flashed with a blinding light, and Sarah felt herself being pulled into it, her vision spinning as if she were falling through a void. She tried to pull away, but it was no use. The phone had a grip on her, and she could feel herself slipping, falling into its dark embrace. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was no longer in her apartment. She stood in a vast, shadowy landscape, the ground beneath her feet cracked and barren. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds, crackling with energy. It was a place of nightmares, a realm that existed outside of time and space. In the distance, she saw a figure, a tall, imposing shape standing against the storm. It was the new collector, but his form was twisted, more monstrous than before. His eyes gleamed with a dark power, and his smile was one of pure malice. "Welcome to my domain," he said, his voice echoing through the desolate landscape. "This is where all curses come to rest. This is where you will belong, Sarah. Forever." Sarah felt a surge of panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to find a way out, a way to break the curse once and for all. But as she looked around, she realized that the landscape was not just a place. It was a prison, a trap designed to hold her. The new collector's form began to dissolve, his body becoming a mass of shifting shadows. From the darkness, countless other figures began to emerge, twisted, corrupted versions of people Sarah had known, each one a victim of the curse, each one bound to the same fate. "You are not alone," the new collector's voice whispered from the shadows. "We are all here, all of us, bound by the same curse. And now, so are you." Sarah's heart raced as the figures closed in around her, their faces twisted in agony. She knew that she couldn't escape this place, not without help. She had to find a way to break the curse once and for all, to free herself and the others from the endless cycle of darkness. But as she took a step forward, she felt the phone vibrate in her pocket. She pulled it out, her hands shaking, and saw the message that appeared on the screen. "The collector is waiting. The cycle will continue unless you make a choice." Sarah stood at the crossroads of her fate. The curse had taken root once more, and now she had to decide. Would she succumb to the darkness, or would she fight to break the cycle for good? The phone buzzed again, and another message appeared. "You are part of the curse, Sarah. There is no escape, but you can control it. Join us, and you will be free." Sarah's mind raced. She had fought so hard to break free from the curse, but now it seemed like there was no way out. The darkness was too powerful, too all-consuming. She had already sacrificed so much. But then, in the distance, she saw a faint light, a glimmer of hope. It was Vincent, standing in the shadows, his hand outstretched toward her. "Don't give up," he said, his voice cutting through the darkness. "You can break the cycle. Together, we can end this." With a final, desperate surge of strength, Sarah made her decision. She would not let the curse claim her. She would not let the darkness consume her. She would fight, no matter the cost. The battle for Sarah's soul had only just begun. The curse may have returned, but Sarah was not the same person she had been before. With Vincent by her side, she would face the darkness head-on, determined to break the cycle once and for all. The phone may have called to her, but she would not answer. Not this time. Sarah's heart pounded as she grasped Vincent's hand, her fingers trembling. The landscape around them seemed to warp, as though the very fabric of reality was bending to the will of the curse. The dark sky above them churned with ominous clouds, and the ground beneath their feet felt like it was alive, shifting and pulsing with an unnatural energy. It was a place of endless torment, a dimension born of suffering and despair. "This is it," Vincent said, his voice steady but tinged with the same fear Sarah felt. "We have to break the cycle, Sarah. We have to destroy the source." Sarah nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. The phone in her pocket vibrated again, a constant reminder of the curse's grip on her. She knew the stakes. If they failed, they would be trapped here, bound by the same endless torment as all the others who had fallen victim to the curse. "The collector's power is stronger than ever," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it. It's part of me now." "Because it is," Vincent replied, his eyes meeting hers. "The curse is already latched onto you, but you're stronger than it. We can end this, Sarah. We just have to find the heart of the curse." As they walked through the desolate landscape, Sarah's mind raced. She had been through so much already, facing the collector, shattering the phone, breaking the curse time and time again. But every time she thought she was free, the darkness returned, more powerful than before. It was as if the curse was a living thing, feeding off her fear, her doubts, her pain. And now, it had evolved into something even more insidious, something that had learned from its previous failures and adapted. The phone was no longer just a cursed object. It was a portal, a gateway to an entire realm of darkness. "We have to find the source," Sarah said, determination filling her voice. "The phone is just a symptom. The curse is bigger than that. We have to destroy whatever is feeding it." Vincent nodded. "Let's keep moving. We don't have much time." The further they walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for them as they passed. In the distance, Sarah saw a flicker of light, a faint, ghostly glow that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "That's it," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. "That's where it's coming from." They quickened their pace, the ground beneath them trembling with each step. As they neared the source of the light, the landscape began to change. The desolation gave way to a twisted, grotesque version of a city that seemed to be made of shadows and nightmares. Towering structures loomed overhead, their surfaces slick with blackened veins of energy. In the center of the city stood a massive, pulsating mass, a dark heart, beating with an unnatural rhythm. "That's it," Vincent whispered. "The heart of the curse." The mass of darkness throbbed with power, its tendrils reaching out like claws, grasping at the air. It was as if the very essence of the curse had taken physical form, a malignant force that fed on the souls trapped within this dimension. "We have to destroy it," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "But how?" Vincent's eyes narrowed. "We can't just destroy it. We need to sever its connection to the real world. If we destroy the heart without cutting the connection, the curse will just find another way to return." Sarah's heart sank. "How do we do that?" Vincent stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the dark mass. "I think I know, but it's going to take everything we have." Vincent led Sarah to a narrow alleyway between two of the twisted buildings. There, hidden in the shadows, was an ancient stone tablet. The surface was covered in strange symbols, etched into the stone with precision and care. The symbols pulsed faintly, as if they were alive, reacting to their presence. "This is it," Vincent said, crouching down beside the tablet. "This is the ritual that can sever the curse's connection to the real world. But we'll need the phone to activate it." Sarah hesitated. The phone. But it's the source of all this. I don't want to touch it again. Vincent placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know, but we don't have a choice. The phone is the key. Without it, the ritual won't work." With a deep breath, Sarah pulled the phone from her pocket. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a surge of cold energy shot through her, like a shockwave that rattled her bones. The phone flickered to life, its screen glowing with an eerie light. A message appeared on the screen. "You cannot escape." Sarah's heart raced, but she fought to keep her composure. She placed the phone on the stone tablet. the symbols on the tablet glowing brighter as the phone's energy began to merge with the ancient runes. "This is it," Vincent said. "We have to complete the ritual before it's too late." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. She could feel the phone's power growing stronger, the darkness closing in around them. The heart of the curse was growing restless, and it was only a matter of time before it would strike. As Sarah and Vincent chanted the words of the ritual, the world around them began to tremble. The dark heart in the center of the city pulsed with fury, its tendrils lashing out, trying to stop them. Shadows clawed at Sarah, pulling at her, dragging her toward the heart of the curse. But Sarah held her ground. She focused on the ritual, on the symbols on the tablet, on the phone that was now glowing with a blinding light. She could feel the curse's grip on her weakening, but it wasn't enough. The heart of the curse was still too powerful. "We're not finished yet," Vincent shouted, his voice strained. "We need to finish the chant. Now!" With a final, desperate surge of energy, Sarah and Vincent completed the ritual. The phone shattered, its screen exploding in a burst of light. The symbols on the tablet flared, sending a shockwave of energy through the city. The dark heart let out a deafening scream as its power was severed, its tendrils collapsing in on themselves. For a moment, everything was silent, and then the world began to crumble. Sarah woke up in her apartment, her heart racing. She was back in the real world. The phone, the curse, the dark dimension, it was all gone. The air was still, peaceful. The shadows no longer felt oppressive. She was free. But as she looked around, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The phone had been destroyed, the curse broken, but the weight of everything she had endured still lingered. She had fought so hard to escape the darkness, but she knew that the scars would remain. Vincent was there, standing by the window, his back to her. He turned when he heard her stir, a faint smile on his lips. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. Sarah nodded, but her gaze was distant. "I hope so, but I don't know if we'll ever truly be free. The darkness. It's always waiting, always watching." Vincent stepped forward, taking her hand. "We've broken the cycle. Together, we can keep it that way. As long as we stay strong, the curse won't come back." Sarah looked into his eyes, the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders. But for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. The curse had been broken, but the battle was far from over. Months passed, and Sarah and Vincent settled into a new life. They kept their distance from the supernatural, from anything that might bring the curse back. But in the back of Sarah's mind, the shadows still lingered. She knew that evil never truly disappeared. It just waited patiently for the right moment to return. And one day, when the phone rang again, she would be ready. Months passed since the ritual, and Sarah thought she had finally found peace. She had settled into a quiet life with Vincent, away from the supernatural horrors that had once plagued her. The world felt normal again, almost too normal. She had a steady job, a comfortable apartment, and a sense of safety that she hadn't felt in years. But even in the calm, there was a sense of unease that lingered at the edges of her mind. The nightmares had stopped, but the memories of the curse were still vivid in her mind, like a scar that refused to heal. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as she sat on the couch, reading a book, she heard the faintest sound, a soft tapping on the window. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was too quiet outside for it to be the wind, and there was no one she knew who would knock like that. She stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. The street was empty, the only light coming from the dim street lamps. Nothing seemed out of place, but as she turned away, she saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of her eye. Her breath caught in her throat. The shadow was gone before she could fully process what she had seen, but the feeling of dread remained, settling deep in her chest. The next day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as if the world had shifted just slightly out of alignment. She went about her day as usual, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the tapping on the window, to the shadow she had glimpsed. That night, as she sat at her desk, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. Her stomach twisted as she stared at the screen, the familiar feeling of dread creeping back into her veins. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The voice on the other end was distorted, almost static-like, but unmistakable. "Sarah." Her heart stopped. It was the voice of the new collector, the voice that had haunted her for so long. But how could it be? The curse had been broken. The phone had been destroyed. There was no way he could still be here. "You thought you were free," the voice continued, its tone mocking. "But the curse never truly leaves. It just waits, and now it's coming for you again." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah in stunned silence. She dropped the phone onto the desk, her hands trembling. The room felt colder, the shadows darker. She was not free. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. Sarah tried to go on with her life, but the phone call had shattered her sense of peace. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The curse wasn't over. The collector was still out there, somewhere, and it seemed he had found a way to return. She met with Vincent to discuss what had happened, her voice shaky as she recounted the call. He listened intently, his face grim. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "We destroyed the phone. We broke the curse. How could he still be?" Vincent shook his head. "We don't know everything about the curse, Sarah. There's still so much we don't understand. It's possible that we only severed part of the connection. The collector was never just a man. He was a force, a manifestation of the curse itself. Maybe he found a way to survive, to persist." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "So what do we do now?" "We find him," Vincent said, his voice steady. "We find out what's left of the curse, and we destroy it once and for all." Sarah and Vincent began their search for answers, scouring every resource they could find. They consulted old texts, ancient rituals, and even the remnants of the phone's shattered screen. But no matter how hard they searched, they found nothing that could explain how the collector had returned, or how they could stop him for good. The days turned into weeks, and the sense of dread only grew stronger. Strange things began to happen around them. Objects in Sarah's apartment would move on their own, and the shadows seemed to grow longer at night, stretching into impossible shapes. Sometimes, Sarah would hear faint whispers, voices just out of reach, like echoes of something she couldn't quite remember. One night, as she lay in bed, she felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes watching her. She sat up, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. The room was dark, but she could see the faintest movement in the corner of the room. Something shifting, something that shouldn't be there. "Vincent," she called, her voice trembling. But there was no answer. The shadows seemed to grow, creeping toward her like living things. She could hear the whispers again, louder this time, growing more frantic. And then, in the center of the room, a figure appeared, tall, dark, and twisted. It was the collector. His face was obscured by shadows, but Sarah could feel his presence, his power, radiating from him like a suffocating cloud. "You thought you could escape," he whispered, his voice a cold, malevolent hiss. "But the curse never truly leaves. It just waits, and now, you are mine again." The figure of the collector loomed in front of Sarah, his form flickering like a dying flame. She could feel the weight of his presence, the oppressive darkness that surrounded him. It was as if the very air had thickened, and she was suffocating under the weight of it. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "You're not real. You can't be." The collector's laugh was low and cruel, echoing through the room like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "I am as real as the curse you cannot escape," he said, his form shifting like smoke. "You cannot run from me, Sarah. You cannot hide. The curse is eternal, and you will always be its servant." Sarah's mind raced. She had to think. She couldn't let him take her again. She couldn't let him win. Suddenly, a thought struck her. The ritual, the one that had severed the curse's connection before. If she could find a way to complete it again, to truly destroy the heart of the curse, maybe, just maybe, she could end this once and for all. But the collector was moving closer, his presence growing stronger. She could feel his power pressing down on her, trying to crush her will. He was a manifestation of the curse, and as long as he existed, the darkness would never truly fade. She had to act fast. Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on the ritual she had performed before. She remembered the words, the symbols, the energy that had surged through her. She needed the phone, the key to completing the ritual. But this time, she didn't have the cursed phone. It was gone, destroyed. But there was something else, something she had never considered before. The curse had been passed through the phone, yes, but it had also passed through her. She had been marked by it, connected to it in ways she couldn't fully understand. The ritual hadn't just destroyed the phone. It had also severed the connection between her and the curse. Now, Sarah realized she had to reconnect to that power. She had to draw on the strength of the curse itself, but use it against the collector. With trembling hands, Sarah began to chant the words of the ritual, her voice growing stronger with each passing syllable. The collector recoiled, his form flickering, as if the ritual was beginning to affect him. "You cannot stop me," he hissed, but his voice was weaker now, faltering. Sarah's eyes burned with determination. "I will stop you. I will end this curse." The shadows around the collector began to unravel, his form disintegrating into smoke as the ritual reached its climax. With one final, powerful word, Sarah completed the chant. The collector screamed, his voice a cacophony of agony, as his form was consumed by the light of the ritual. The room was filled with a blinding flash, and for a moment, Sarah felt herself being pulled into the light. And then everything went silent. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was alone. The darkness was gone. The shadows no longer pressed in on her. The air felt lighter, the world clearer. She had done it. The curse was finally broken. But as she stood in the quiet aftermath, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. The curse had been defeated, but the scars it left behind would never fully fade. And somewhere, in the farthest corners of the world, the echoes of the curse waiting for the next soul to answer the call. It had been weeks since Sarah performed the final ritual, and she was beginning to believe that the curse was truly gone. The shadows no longer seemed to reach for her. The whispers had faded, and she felt the first genuine sense of peace she had experienced in years. Vincent had stayed by her side, helping her rebuild her life, and they had even begun to make plans for the future, a future where the horrors of the curse were nothing but distant memories. But as the days passed, Sarah couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The world seemed too still, too quiet. It was as if everything had returned to normal, but it was an unsettling normality, one that felt unnatural. She tried to ignore it, to focus on the present, but the unease gnawed at her. One night, as she sat alone in her apartment, she heard a soft tapping on the window. Her blood ran cold. It was the same sound she had heard before, the sound that had heralded the collector's return. Her hands trembled as she stood and approached the window. The street outside was empty, just like before. Nothing was there, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. Suddenly, the phone on her desk vibrated. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to answer it. She couldn't. Not again. But as if compelled by some unseen force, she picked it up. The screen flickered to life, displaying an unknown number. She stared at it, her breath caught in her throat. The voice that had haunted her for so long had returned. "Sarah." The voice was low, distorted, but unmistakable. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This can't be happening. You thought you were free." The voice continued, its tone mocking. "But the curse never truly leaves. It waits, biding its time, and now it's coming for you once more." The call ended abruptly, and Sarah was left standing in the silence, her mind racing. The curse had returned, or had it ever really left? Was this just another manifestation, or was there something more insidious at play? The days that followed were filled with tension. Sarah tried to go about her routine, but the creeping sense of dread never left her. Vincent noticed her unease, but when she told him about the call, he seemed as skeptical as she had been when it all began. "You've been through a lot, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with concern. "Maybe it's just the stress. You've been living in constant fear for so long, it's hard to let go of it." But Sarah wasn't convinced. Something was wrong, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, as she walked home from work, she felt a sudden chill in the air. The sun had set, and the streets were bathed in the cold glow of the streetlights. She quickened her pace, but as she passed an alleyway, she caught a glimpse of something, or rather, someone standing in the shadows. It was a figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, with eyes that gleamed in the dim light. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the figure instantly. It was the collector. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice echoing in the empty street. "You cannot escape. Not now. Not ever." Sarah stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the pavement, but the figure didn't move. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough to paralyze her. She didn't stop running until she reached her apartment, slamming the door shut behind her. She leaned against it, gasping for air, her body trembling with fear. The collector was here. The curse was back. The next few days were a blur of fear and confusion. Sarah couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched, that the shadows were closing in on her once again. She tried to reach out to Vincent, but he was distant, caught up in his own worries about her mental state. He didn't understand, no one did. The curse was real, and it had returned. One night, as she sat in her apartment, she noticed something strange. A dark mark had appeared on her arm, just above her wrist. It was faint at first, like a bruise, but it seemed to grow darker with each passing hour. Sarah stared at it in horror. She recognized the mark. It was the same one she had seen on the victims of the collector. The curse had claimed her once again. Panicking, Sarah rushed to the mirror, trying to see if there were any other signs of the curse's return. But as she looked into her reflection, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her eyes, her once bright, clear eyes, were now clouded with darkness, as if the curse had seeped into her very soul. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not again." Sarah knew she couldn't fight this alone. She needed Vincent, but when she reached out to him, she found that he was gone. His apartment was empty, his belongings gone, as if he had vanished into thin air. She searched for him, but the trail went cold. It was as if he had never existed, and with his disappearance, the shadows seemed to grow darker, the curse tightening its grip on her. As the days passed, Sarah's fear turned to desperation. She could feel the curse pulling her deeper into its grasp, and she knew that if she didn't act soon, she would be lost forever. But every attempt to escape was thwarted. The collector's presence was everywhere, lurking in the corners of her vision, whispering in her ear, reminding her that she was his. "You cannot escape," he hissed, his voice growing louder with each passing day. "You are mine, always." Sarah's mind began to unravel. The curse was too powerful, too insidious. She had tried to fight it, tried to break free, but it was as if the darkness was a part of her now, woven into the very fabric of her being. Sarah knew what she had to do. She had to face the collector, to confront the curse head on. There was no other way. She couldn't keep running. She couldn't keep hiding. The collector had always been more than just a man. He was the embodiment of the curse, the force that had haunted her for so long. And now it was time to end it. With trembling hands, Sarah gathered the remnants of the ritual she had performed all those months ago. She knew that this time, she had to finish what she had started. She had to sever the connection between herself and the curse once and for all. The phone, the mark on her arm, the shadows, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. The collector had made her his servant, but she would not let him control her any longer. As she began the ritual, the darkness in her apartment grew, swirling around her like a storm. The collector's laughter echoed in her ears, but she blocked it out, focusing on the words of the chant. She could feel the power of the curse rising, but she refused to be afraid. He had come too far to turn back now. "I am not yours," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "I will not be your servant." The darkness roared, but Sarah stood firm. She completed the chant, And with a final surge of energy, the curse was shattered. The collector's presence faded, his laughter silenced, and the mark on her arm vanished. For the first time in years, Sarah felt free. The curse was finally gone. The shadows that had once haunted Sarah's every step were no longer there. The mark on her arm was gone, and the darkness that had threatened to consume her had dissipated. But as she stood in the silence of her apartment, Sarah knew that the battle had come at a cost. The scars of the curse would never fully heal. The memories of the fear, the darkness, and the collector would stay with her forever. And though the curse was gone, Sarah knew that evil was never truly vanquished. It simply waited for the next soul to fall. But she had survived, and as long as she had the strength to fight, she would never let the darkness claim her again. It had been a week since the curse had been broken, and Sarah was beginning to feel the weight of the silence that had settled over her life. The oppressive shadows, the whispers, the constant feeling of being watched, all of it was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe without fear clutching at her chest. But there was a strange emptiness that followed. The world seemed quieter, almost too still, as if the chaos that had once consumed her had left a void that couldn't be filled. The peace she had longed for felt distant, and the life she was trying to rebuild seemed fragile, like a house of cards waiting to collapse. Vincent had returned, but he was different. The disappearance had shaken him deeply, and although he was physically present, emotionally, he seemed distant, withdrawn. It was as if the curse had taken something from him as well, something that neither of them could fully understand. They tried to talk about it, but the words never seemed to come out right. Instead, they both clung to the silence, each of them processing the aftermath in their own way. One evening, Sarah decided to go through the old boxes of belongings she had kept from her life before the curse. She had avoided them for months, afraid of what they might remind her of, but now, she felt a strange compulsion to confront the past. As she sifted through the boxes, she came across the remnants of her old life, photos, letters, mementos. But then, buried beneath the memories, she found something she hadn't expected, an old, cracked phone. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at it. It was the same model as the cursed phone, the one that had started everything, the one that had bound her to the collector. But this phone was different. It was no longer glowing with that eerie, unnatural light. It was just a phone, an ordinary object disconnected from the curse. But something about it felt wrong. She hesitated for a moment. Then, unable to resist, she picked it up. As soon as her fingers touched the screen, the phone vibrated in her hand. She dropped it in shock, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, nothing happened. The phone lay still on the table, its screen cracked but otherwise lifeless. But then, the screen flickered to life, displaying an unknown number. The same number from before. Sarah's blood ran cold as she stared at the phone, the number flashing on the screen. It couldn't be. She had destroyed the cursed phone. She had completed the ritual. The collector was gone. Yet here was... the curse had found its way back. The phone rang, its tone sharp and insistent. With shaking hands, Sarah answered it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was distorted, as if the speaker were underwater. But there was no mistaking it. It was the collector. "Sarah." His voice was cold and mocking. "Did you think you could escape me? Did you think the curse could be destroyed so easily? You were wrong." Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't let the curse claim her again. She couldn't let the collector win. "I don't have to listen to you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I destroyed you. You're nothing." "Nothing?" The collector laughed, the sound hollow and chilling. "You can't escape what's inside you, Sarah. The curse was never just a phone. It was always a part of you, a part of your soul. And now, it's time for you to face the truth." The phone went silent. Sarah stared at it, her heart racing. The words echoed in her mind. The curse was never just a phone. It was always a part of you. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew she had to find out. She couldn't let the curse control her again. She had to finish what she started. Sarah spent the next few days trying to piece together what the collector had meant. She pored over the remnants of the curse, searching for any clue that could explain why it had returned, why it had followed her. The more she searched, the more she realized that the curse wasn't just something that could be destroyed. It was something that had become intertwined with her very being. Her nightmares returned, but this time they were different. They weren't filled with visions of the collector or the phone, but with images of her own past, her childhood, her family, her life before the curse. She saw herself as a little girl, playing in the backyard with her brother, laughing in the sunlight. But then something shifted. The laughter turned to screams, the sunlight faded, and a shadow fell over everything. In her dreams, she was always running from something, from someone, but no matter how fast she ran, the shadow was always there, just behind her, always watching. And then, in the darkest corner of her mind, she saw it. The truth. Sarah had never known the full story of her family's past. Her parents had always kept secrets from her, things she had never questioned as a child. But now, as the memories resurfaced, she realized that the curse had been in her blood all along. Her family had a history, a dark history. Her great-grandmother had been involved in occult practices, dabbling in forbidden rituals that had drawn the attention of malevolent forces. She had made a pact, a deal with something dark and ancient, and in doing so, had cursed her bloodline. The collector wasn't just a man. He was a manifestation of that curse, a force that had been passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment to claim its due. And now it had found Sarah. The phone had been the conduit, the link between her and the curse, but it wasn't the true source. The curse had always been inside her, a part of her lineage, and no matter how many times she destroyed it, it would always find a way back. Sarah knew what she had to do. She couldn't keep running from her past. She couldn't keep hiding from the curse. She had to face it head on, confront the darkness that had been passed down through generations, and destroy it once and for all. But this time, she couldn't do it alone. She reached out to Vincent, explaining everything, the curse, her family's dark history, the truth she had uncovered. At first, he was skeptical, but as she spoke, he saw the fear in her eyes and the conviction in her voice. He knew she wasn't lying. Together, they began to search for a way to sever the curse permanently. They dug deeper into her family's past, uncovering ancient rituals and forgotten knowledge. They learned that the curse could only be broken by severing the bloodline itself, by destroying the source of the pact her great-grandmother had made. But it wouldn't be easy. The collector was still watching, still waiting for the right moment to strike. And Sarah knew that this time, the battle would be the hardest one yet. With Vincent by her side, Sarah gathered the tools for the final ritual, the one that would break the curse for good. She had to face her family's dark past, confront the pact that had been made, and destroy the curse at its very source. The ritual was dangerous, but it was the only way. As they stood in the circle of candles, Sarah felt the weight of the curse pressing down on her once again. The shadows swirled around them, and she could hear the collector's voice in the distance, taunting her. But this time, Sarah was ready. She chanted the ancient words, her voice steady and strong, and with each syllable, she felt the curse weakening, unraveling. And then, with one final, powerful cry, she severed the connection. The collector's voice screamed in rage, but it was too late. The curse was broken. For good. When the ritual was over, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. The shadows were gone, the whispers silenced. The curse had finally been broken, and the darkness that had haunted her for so long was no more. But as she looked at Vincent, she knew that the journey wasn't over. The scars of the past would always be with her, but now, she had the chance to rebuild, to live a life free from the curse. And as she stepped into the light, Sarah knew that she had finally broken the cycle. The world felt different now. Sarah walked through the streets, the sun shining brightly overhead, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of the curse pressing down on her. The shadows that once lurked in every corner were gone. The whispers that had haunted her thoughts were silent. It was a new beginning. But even as she reveled in her newfound freedom, there was a part of her that couldn't quite shake the feeling of loss. The curse had taken so much from her, her peace, her sense of safety, her trust in the world around her. It had been a constant presence in her life, and now that it was gone, she was left with a strange emptiness, a void that she wasn't sure how to fill. She hadn't realized how much she had relied on the fear, how much of her identity had been shaped by the constant threat of the curse. Now that it was over, she felt adrift, unsure of who she was without it. Vincent had noticed a change in her too. While he was relieved that the curse was gone, he couldn't help but worry about Sarah's mental state. She had been through so much, and even though she had broken free from the curse, the emotional scars remained. They spent more time together, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Vincent tried his best to support her, but he didn't fully understand the depth of what she had experienced. The trauma of the curse was something that couldn't be easily explained, and Sarah didn't know how to make him understand. As the weeks passed, Sarah tried to return to a sense of normalcy. She went back to work, started seeing her friends again, and even began to think about the future, something she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. But the shadows of the past still lingered, and she couldn't escape the feeling that something wasn't quite right. There were nights when she would wake up in a cold sweat, her heart racing, her mind racing with thoughts of the collector. His voice still echoed in her mind, and the memories of the darkness that had consumed her were never far from the surface. It was as if the curse had left a permanent mark on her soul, one that would never fade. She tried to talk to Vincent about it, but he didn't fully understand. He wanted to help, but how could anyone understand the depths of her fear, the years of torment she had endured? She had been alone in that darkness for so long, and now that it was over, she didn't know how to find her way back to the light. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, she found herself staring at the phone. The cursed phone. It was still there, tucked away in a drawer, a relic of the past. She hadn't thought about it in weeks, but now, as she stared at it, a strange compulsion took hold of her. She reached for it, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. It felt cold, lifeless in her hands, but as she stared at the cracked screen, something inside her stirred. She had destroyed the curse, hadn't she? She had broken the cycle. So why did the phone still feel so wrong? The phone vibrated in her hand, and Sarah froze. Her breath caught in her throat. No, it couldn't be. She had destroyed the curse. She had severed the connection. But as the screen flickered to life, her heart sank. The same unknown number was flashing on the display. It was impossible. The curse was supposed to be gone. The collector was gone. With shaking hands, she answered the phone, her voice barely a whisper. Hello? There was a long pause on the other end, and then that familiar voice, distorted, low, and chilling, came through the receiver. Sarah, the voice was calm, almost soothing. Did you really think you could escape? Her heart pounded in her chest as the words echoed in her mind. Did you really think you could escape? She slammed the phone down, her mind racing. How could this be happening? How was the collector still able to reach her? Had the curse never truly left? Or was this some new manifestation of the darkness? She grabbed the phone again, determined to destroy it once and for all. But as her fingers touched the screen, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She felt her knees go weak, and she collapsed onto the floor, the phone slipping from her grasp. Her vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin. In the distance, she heard the collector's voice again, but it was no longer coming from the phone. It was coming from everywhere. You cannot escape, Sarah. You belong to me. Sarah tried to stand, but the darkness was closing in around her. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in, the shadows creeping toward her like living things. She could hear the collector's laughter, low and mocking, filling the space around her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The darkness was suffocating her, and she was powerless to stop it. But then, in the midst of the chaos, she heard another voice. This one was familiar, Vincent's voice calling her name. Sarah, Sarah, wake up. She opened her eyes, gasping for air. The room was normal again. The shadows had retreated. The phone was still on the floor, but it was no longer glowing. It was just a phone, nothing more. Vincent was kneeling beside her, his face filled with concern. "Sarah, what's going on? What happened?" She stared at him, her heart racing. "It's happening again. The curse is not gone. It's still here." Vincent's eyes widened in disbelief. "But we destroyed it. We broke the curse." "I thought we did," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "But it's not over. It's never over." The following days were filled with confusion and fear. Sarah couldn't escape the feeling that the collector was still out there, watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. She had broken the curse, but somehow it had found a way back into her life. She couldn't keep running from it. She couldn't keep hiding. She had to face it one last time. With Vincent by her side, Sarah began to search for a way to end the curse for good. They revisited the rituals, the ancient texts, the forgotten knowledge that had once helped her break the curse. This time, they would do it right. They would destroy the darkness once and for all. They knew the final confrontation wouldn't be easy. The collector was more than just a man. He was the embodiment of the curse itself. But Sarah was ready. She had to be. The ritual was dangerous, but they had no choice. Together, they would face the darkness, and together, they would destroy it. As Sarah stood at the center of the ritual circle, the air around her crackled with energy. The shadows gathered once again, but this time, Sarah was not afraid. She had the strength to face them. She had the strength to face the collector. And this time, she would win. The ritual reached its climax, and with a final, powerful incantation, the darkness was torn apart. The collector's voice screamed in agony, but it was no match for the power of the ritual. The curse had been shattered. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the weight of the darkness lift from her shoulders. The shadows faded, and the whispers fell silent. The collector was gone. The curse was finally broken. In the aftermath of the ritual, Sarah stood in the quiet of the room, her heart still racing. The curse was gone. The collector was gone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. But as she looked at Vincent, she knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The scars of the curse would remain, but they would no longer define her. She had faced the darkness, and she had emerged victorious. Together, they would rebuild. Together, they would find peace. And this time, the darkness would never return. The days following the final confrontation were filled with a strange mix of relief and disorientation. Sarah had defeated the collector, destroyed the curse, and broken free from the chains that had bound her for so long. Yet, despite the triumph, a sense of unease remained. The world outside her apartment seemed unchanged. People went about their lives, oblivious to the horrors that had consumed her. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The echoes of the curse, the memories of the dark presence that had haunted her, lingered in the corners of her mind, like the faintest whisper in the wind. She tried to push it aside, focusing on the small victories. She went back to work, began seeing her friends again, and even started to make plans for the future. But every now and then, when she was alone, the silence would become too heavy, and the shadows would creep back in. Vincent noticed it too. Though he was supportive, there was a distance between them now. He had been there through the darkest moments, but Sarah could see the weight of everything they had gone through reflected in his eyes. The trauma of the curse had left its mark on both of them. They tried to talk about it, but the words always seemed to fail them. It was as if they had both been changed in ways they couldn't fully understand. Sarah knew that she couldn't keep running from the past. The curse was gone, but the impact it had on her life would take time to heal. She needed to find a way to move forward, to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. She began therapy, something she had never considered before. Talking to someone who wasn't involved in the chaos of her life felt like a small but necessary step. At first, it was difficult to open up. How could she explain the things she had experienced? The darkness, the fear, the feeling of being hunted by an invisible force. But over time, she found that speaking about it, even in the most basic terms, helped her process the trauma. She learned to understand the impact the curse had on her psyche, how it had shaped her responses to the world, and how she could begin to reclaim control over her life. Therapy didn't fix everything, but it was a start, and that, for Sarah, was enough. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to feel a shift. It was subtle at first, moments of peace where the weight of the curse didn't hang over her like a cloud. She started to rediscover parts of herself that had been buried under fear and darkness for so long. She began to take walks in the park again, enjoying the simple act of breathing in fresh air. She reconnected with old friends, laughing over shared memories and experiences. She even started a new hobby, painting, something she had always wanted to try, but never had the time for. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was living again, not just surviving. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined her. Vincent was by her side through it all, and though their relationship had changed, it had also grown stronger. They both understood the importance of healing, of moving forward together. It wasn't easy, but they were learning how to rebuild their connection, one step at a time. But just as Sarah was beginning to feel like she was truly free, something happened that sent a chill down her spine. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, she received a text message. It was from an unknown number. "You can't escape what's inside you, Sarah. It was never just a curse. It's a part of you. You can't run from it." Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the message. It was the same message she had received before, just after breaking the curse. The same words, the same eerie tone. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had destroyed the curse. She had faced the collector and won. But now, it seemed as though the darkness was trying to return. She immediately blocked the number, but the unease lingered. Was this a new manifestation of the curse? Had she truly broken free, or was the darkness simply lying in wait? The following days were filled with tension. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something was lurking just beyond her reach. She tried to convince herself that it was just her mind playing tricks on her, but the message, the words, haunted her. She reached out to Vincent, telling him about the text message. He was concerned, but he tried to reassure her. "It's probably just someone messing with you," he said. "You've been through a lot, Sarah. You're still processing everything. It's natural to feel like you're being haunted by the past." But Sarah wasn't so sure. The text had been too specific, too personal. It felt like the curse was reaching out to her again, as if the collector had never truly left. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she heard it again. The faint sound of whispering, just on the edge of her hearing. She sat up, heart racing, but the room was empty. There was no one there, but the whispers continued, growing louder, until they filled the space around her. "You can't escape, Sarah." Her blood ran cold. The collector's voice. Sarah knew what she had to do. She couldn't keep running from the curse. She had faced it before, and she would face it again. This time, though, she was different. She wasn't the same terrified woman who had first encountered the collector. She had strength now. Strength born from surviving the curse, from breaking free and reclaiming her life. She reached out to Vincent, telling him about the whispers, the messages, and her growing fear that the curse was returning. Together, they began to research everything they could about the collector, the curse, and the true nature of the darkness that had consumed her. They discovered something chilling. The curse was not just a force that could be broken. It was a cycle, a pattern that repeated itself across generations, a force that could never truly be destroyed. It could only be contained, suppressed, or redirected. But Sarah wasn't willing to accept that. She had fought too hard to be free to let the darkness reclaim her life. She would find a way to end the cycle once and for all. With Vincent by her side, she began preparing for the final confrontation. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The collector would be waiting for her, and the curse would try to reclaim her soul. But she was ready. This time, Sarah would break the cycle. For good. Sarah and Vincent stood together, surrounded by candles, ancient texts, and the tools of the final ritual. They had learned everything they needed to know about the curse, about the collector, and how to sever the bond between Sarah and the darkness forever. As Sarah recited the incantations, The air around them crackled with energy. The shadows began to swirl, and the collector's voice echoed in the distance. "You cannot escape me, Sarah. You belong to me." But Sarah didn't flinch. She was no longer the woman who had been terrified of the curse. She was stronger now, more determined than ever to end the darkness that had haunted her for so long. With one final cry, she completed the ritual, and the darkness shattered. The collector's voice screamed in rage, but it was too late. The curse was broken. In the aftermath of the ritual, Sarah stood in the stillness, her heart racing, but her mind clear. The curse was gone, and this time, it was gone for good. The darkness that had consumed her life was no more. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly free. She turned to Vincent, a smile tugging at her lips. Together, they had faced the darkness and won. Together, they would rebuild, and this time, nothing would stand in their way. The curse was over. The collector was gone, and Sarah was finally free. The silence in Sarah's apartment was overwhelming. For the first time in years, she was not constantly on edge, waiting for the next whisper or the next dark presence to invade her life. The collector was gone, and the curse had been shattered once and for all. But with the absence of the curse came a strange emptiness. For so long, Sarah had lived in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. It had been her reality. Now that it was gone, she found herself questioning who she was without it. The darkness had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully realized until now. She sat in the living room, staring at the space around her. The walls, once filled with shadows and whispers, now felt cold and unfamiliar. She had been so focused on surviving, on breaking the curse, that she hadn't allowed herself to think about what came next. She had a chance at a new life, but the question was, what did that life look like? Vincent had been a constant presence by her side throughout the ordeal. He had supported her through the darkest moments, and together, they had faced the curse head-on. But now, with the curse gone, their relationship was shifting. They were both different people, and they needed to find a new way to connect. Vincent could see the strain in Sarah's eyes. She was no longer the woman who had been hunted by the collector, but she wasn't the same person she had been before the curse either. The trauma of everything she had endured was still there, buried beneath the surface. "I know you're trying to rebuild, Sarah," he said one evening, as they sat together in the quiet of her apartment. "But you don't have to do it alone. We've been through this together. I'm here for you." Sarah smiled weakly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate that, Vincent. I really do. But I don't even know who I am anymore. I've spent so long fighting to survive that I forgot what it means to live." Vincent reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You're not alone. We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." But Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. She had been trapped in a cycle of fear for so long that she wasn't sure how to live without it. The curse had been her constant companion, and now that it was gone, she felt adrift. Sarah began to realize that the silence in her life was both a blessing and a curse. The absence of the constant fear and anxiety was a relief, but it also left her with a void she wasn't sure how to fill. The curse had defined her for so long that without it, she didn't know what her purpose was. She spent hours in her apartment, staring out the window, wondering what to do next. She had always dreamed of a life beyond the curse, but now that she had it, she wasn't sure how to begin. She started small, taking walks in the park, reconnecting with old friends, and even picking up hobbies she had once abandoned. But each step felt like a reminder of the life she had lost, the years that had been stolen from her by the curse. The darkness had shaped her, and now, without it, she was left to rebuild the pieces of herself that had been broken. Though Sarah had made progress, she knew that the road to healing was far from over. She continued her therapy sessions, working through the trauma that had been caused by the curse. She learned that healing wasn't just about getting rid of the fear, it was about confronting the pain and learning to live with it. Her therapist, Dr. Monroe, was patient and understanding, guiding her through the process of unpacking the emotional scars left by the curse. "It's okay to feel lost," Dr. Monroe said one day. "You've been through something extraordinary, and it's going to take time to find your way back to yourself. But you don't have to do it alone. Sarah nodded, grateful for the support. She had been alone for so long, and now, with the curse broken, she was learning to reach out for help. It was a small but significant step toward reclaiming her life. As the months passed, Sarah began to find moments of peace. The nightmares that had once plagued her every night began to fade, replaced by dreams of a future she could build for herself. She started to envision a life without the curse, a life where she could be free to pursue her passions and reconnect with the world. She returned to painting, something she had once loved but had abandoned during the darkest years of the curse. The canvas became a way for her to express the emotions she had kept buried for so long. Each brushstroke was a step toward healing, a way to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost. Vincent, too, found his own path forward. He threw himself into his work, but he also made time for Sarah, supporting her in her journey. They began to rediscover their connection, learning to be there for each other in new ways. The bond they shared had been tested by the curse, but it was still strong. Together, they were finding a new rhythm in their relationship. One day, as Sarah was cleaning out a drawer in her apartment, she came across the curse phone. It had been months since the final ritual, and she had almost forgotten about it. The phone was old, its screen cracked and worn, a relic of the past. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The phone had been the source of so much pain and fear. It had been a constant reminder of the curse that had nearly destroyed her. But now it was just a phone. It no longer held any power over her. With a deep breath, Sarah picked it up and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, but there were no messages, no calls from the collector, just a blank screen. She smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. The phone was just a phone now. The curse was truly gone. She placed the phone in a box, sealing it away. It was a part of her past, but it no longer had a hold on her future. Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the skyline. It was a beautiful evening, one she had never truly appreciated before. For the first time in years, Sarah felt at peace. The curse was gone, and the darkness that had consumed her life was no more. She had faced the worst of it, and she had survived. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah was ready to face it. She had the strength to rebuild her life, to find joy in the small moments, and to embrace the possibility of a life beyond the curse. With Vincent by her side, Sarah knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but it would be hers to walk. And for the first time, that was enough. As the days turned into months, Sarah continued to rebuild her life, piece by piece. She found new purpose in her work, in her relationships, and in the simple joys of everyday life. The curse was no longer a part of her reality, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of it lifting. She had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to build something stronger. She would always carry the scars of her experiences, but they no longer defined her. And as she looked toward the future, Sarah knew that she had the strength to face whatever came next. The curse was gone, the collector was gone, and Sarah was free. Sarah had always dreamed of freedom, of a life where the shadows no longer held her captive. But now that she was free, she realized that freedom came with its own set of challenges. The weight of the past was something she couldn't easily shake off, no matter how hard she tried. The moments of peace she had found were often interrupted by flashes of the past, memories of the curse, the dark presence of the collector, the relentless fear. It was as if those moments were embedded in her very being, lingering just beneath the surface. She had been through so much, but now she had to confront the reality that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a long and difficult process, one that would take time, patience, and understanding. Despite the absence of the curse, Sarah still found herself startled by the slightest noise. A door creaking, a shadow moving in the corner of her vision, a phone ringing unexpectedly. Each time, her heart would race, her breath would catch, and she would be reminded of the years she had spent constantly on edge, waiting for the next threat. It was hard to explain to others. How could she describe the lingering fear that had become a part of her? How could she explain that even though the curse was gone, the fear was still there, etched into her soul? Vincent noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior. He would jump at sudden sounds or withdraw into herself when the world felt too overwhelming. He had been by her side through the worst of it, but now he was unsure of how to help her navigate this new phase. He wanted to be there for her, but he didn't know how to fix what wasn't broken, just damaged. "I'm okay," Sarah would say, brushing off his concern. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. She was still trying to find her footing, still trying to figure out what it meant to be whole again. One of the hardest things Sarah faced was the feeling of losing control. The curse had taken away her sense of agency for so long. Every decision she made had been influenced by the curse, by the fear, by the need to survive. Now that the curse was gone, she found herself struggling to regain control over her life, over her choices. She had once been a woman of certainty, but now every choice felt overwhelming. Should she take the job offer that had been on the table for months? Should she move to a new city to start fresh? Should she reach out to old friends she hadn't spoken to in years? Each decision felt like a monumental task, and the fear of making the wrong choice held her back. What if she made the wrong decision and fell back into the darkness? What if she couldn't truly escape the curse, even now? It wasn't just the big decisions that felt impossible. The small, everyday choices, what to eat for dinner, what to wear, where to go, felt like a battle for control over her own life. As Sarah navigated this new phase of her life, she began to understand that peace wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It was fragile, something that needed to be nurtured and protected. It wasn't the absence of fear or pain, but the ability to live alongside it without letting it consume her. She started to embrace the idea of imperfection. She didn't have to be completely healed or whole to move forward. It was okay to be broken. It was okay to still carry the scars. What mattered was that she was moving forward, one step at a time. Sarah began to allow herself moments of joy again. She laughed with her friends, enjoyed the simple pleasures of life, and even found herself feeling moments of gratitude for the things she once took for granted. She was learning to live again, to find beauty in the small things, even if the shadows of the past still lingered in the corners of her mind. One of the hardest things for Sarah to accept was the fear of the unknown. The curse had been a constant, something she had known and understood, even if it was a source of terror. But now that the curse was gone, she was left with the vast unknown of what came next. What did life look like without the constant threat of darkness? What did it mean to be free, truly free, when she had spent so many years living in survival mode? She had no answers, and that was the scariest part. For so long, her identity had been tied to the curse, surviving it, fighting it, breaking free from it. But now, who was she without it? The unknown stretched out before her, vast and empty. And while that could be seen as a gift, it also felt like a void, a space she wasn't sure how to fill. One of the most significant challenges Sarah faced was rebuilding trust, not just in others, but in herself. The curse had taught her to trust no one, not even her own instincts. She had been betrayed by her own mind, by the phone, by the very thing she had relied on to survive. But now, as she began to heal, she realized that trust was something she had to relearn. She had to trust that she was strong enough to make the right decisions, that she was capable of moving forward, and that she deserved the happiness she was beginning to experience. Vincent played a crucial role in this process. He was patient, never pushing her to heal faster than she was ready. He allowed her the space she needed to rebuild herself, but he was always there, ready to support her when she needed him. Slowly, Sarah began to trust again. She trusted Vincent, who had stood by her side through everything. She trusted her friends, who had never given up on her. And, most importantly, she began to trust herself again. As the months passed, Sarah began to feel a shift. The darkness that had once defined her life was no longer a presence she had to fight against. It was still there, in the form of memories and scars, but it no longer controlled her. She found herself laughing more, smiling more, and even planning for the future. The fear was still there, lurking in the background, but it no longer had the power to consume her. Sarah was learning that healing wasn't a linear process. There were days when she felt strong and hopeful, and days when the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. But she was no longer defined by the curse. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was becoming whole again, one day at a time. The future was still uncertain, but Sarah had learned to embrace it. She no longer felt the need to control every aspect of her life. She had learned to let go, to trust in the process of healing, and to allow herself the space to grow. She had faced the darkness, defeated it, and emerged stronger on the other side. The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined her. They were part of her story, but they didn't have to be the end of it. With Vincent by her side and a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah was ready to face whatever came next. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in years, she was excited to see where it would take her. Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment once more, looking out at the world below. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the city. It was a new day, a new beginning. The curse was gone, the darkness was gone, and Sarah was free. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt at peace. She had faced the worst of it, and now she was ready to embrace the future. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she knew she was strong enough to face them. The journey wasn't over, but it was no longer defined by fear. It was defined by hope, by resilience, and by the possibility of a life reclaimed. And that was enough. They discovered something chilling. The curse was not just a force that could be broken. It was a cycle, a pattern that repeated itself across generations, a force that could never truly be destroyed. It could only be contained, suppressed, or redirected. But Sarah wasn't willing to accept that. She had fought too hard to be free to let the darkness reclaim her life. She would find a way to end the cycle once and for all. With Vincent by her side, she began preparing for the final confrontation. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The collector would be waiting for her, and the curse would try to reclaim her soul. But she was ready. This time, Sarah would break the cycle. For good. Sarah and Vincent stood together, surrounded by candles, ancient texts, and the tools of the final ritual. They had learned everything they needed to know about the curse, about the collector, and how to sever the bond between Sarah and the darkness forever. As Sarah recited the incantations, the air around them crackled with energy. The shadows began to swirl, and the collector's voice echoed in the distance. "You cannot escape me, Sarah. You belong to me." But Sarah didn't flinch. She was no longer the woman who had been terrified of the curse. She was stronger now, more determined than ever to end the darkness that had haunted her for so long. With one final cry, she completed the ritual, and the darkness shattered. The collector's voice screamed in rage, but it was too late. The curse was broken. In the aftermath of the ritual, Sarah stood in the stillness, her heart racing, but her mind clear. The curse was gone, and this time, it was gone for good. The darkness that had consumed her life was no more. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly free. She turned to Vincent, a smile tugging at her lips. Together, they had faced the darkness and won. Together, they would rebuild, and this time, nothing would stand in their way. The curse was over. The collector was gone, and Sarah was finally free. The silence in Sarah's apartment was overwhelming. For the first time in years, she was not constantly on edge, waiting for the next whisper or the next dark presence to invade her life. The collector was gone, and the curse had been shattered once and for all. But with the absence of the curse came a strange emptiness. For so long, Sarah had lived in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. It had been her reality. Now that it was gone, she found herself questioning who she was without it. The darkness had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully realized until now. She sat in the living room, staring at the space around her. The walls, once filled with shadows and whispers, now felt cold and unfamiliar. She had been so focused on surviving, on breaking the curse, that she hadn't allowed herself to think about what came next. She had a chance at a new life, but the question was, what did that life look like? Vincent had been a constant presence by her side throughout the ordeal. He had supported her through the darkest moments, and together, they had faced the curse head-on. But now, with the curse gone, their relationship was shifting. They were both different people, and they needed to find a new way to connect. Vincent could see the strain in Sarah's eyes. She was no longer the woman who had been hunted by the collector, but she wasn't the same person she had been before the curse either. The trauma of everything she had endured was still there, buried beneath the surface. "I know you're trying to rebuild, Sarah," he said one evening, as they sat together in the quiet of her apartment. "But you don't have to do it alone. We've been through this together. I'm here for you." Sarah smiled weakly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I appreciate that, Vincent. I really do. But I don't even know who I am anymore. I've spent so long fighting to survive that I forgot what it means to live." Vincent reached for her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You're not alone. We'll figure this out together, one step at a time." But Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. She had been trapped in a cycle of fear for so long that she wasn't sure how to live without it. The curse had been her constant companion, and now that it was gone, she felt adrift. Sarah began to realize that the silence in her life was both a blessing and a curse. The absence of the constant fear and anxiety was a relief, but it also left her with a void she wasn't sure how to fill. The curse had defined her for so long that without it, she didn't know what her purpose was. She spent hours in her apartment, staring out the window, wondering what to do next. She had always dreamed of a life beyond the curse, but now that she had it, she wasn't sure how to begin. She started small, taking walks in the park, reconnecting with old friends, and even picking up hobbies she had once abandoned. But each step felt like a reminder of the life she had lost, the years that had been stolen from her by the curse. The darkness had shaped her, and now, without it, she was left to rebuild the pieces of herself that had been broken. Though Sarah had made progress, she knew that the road to healing was far from over. She continued her therapy sessions, working through the trauma that had been caused by the curse. She learned that healing wasn't just about getting rid of the fear, it was about confronting the pain and learning to live with it. Her therapist, Dr. Monroe, was patient and understanding, guiding her through the process of unpacking the emotional scars left by the curse. "It's okay to feel lost," Dr. Monroe said one day. "You've been through something extraordinary, and it's going to take time to find your way back to yourself. But you don't have to do it alone." Sarah nodded, grateful for the support. She had been alone for so long, and now, with the curse broken, she was learning to reach out for help. It was a small but significant step toward reclaiming her life. As the months passed, Sarah began to find moments of peace. The nightmares that had once plagued her every night began to fade, replaced by dreams of a future she could build for herself. She started to envision a life without the curse, a life where she could be free to pursue her passions and reconnect with the world. She returned to painting, something she had once loved but had abandoned during the darkest years of the curse. The canvas became a way for her to express the emotions she had kept buried for so long. Each brushstroke was a step toward healing, a way to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost. Vincent, too, found his own path forward. He threw himself into his work, but he also made time for Sarah, supporting her in her journey. They began to rediscover their connection, learning to be there for each other in new ways. The bond they shared had been tested by the curse, but it was still strong. Together, they were finding a new rhythm in their relationship. One day, as Sarah was cleaning out a drawer in her apartment, she came across the curse phone. It had been months since the final ritual, and she had almost forgotten about it. The phone was old, its screen cracked and worn, a relic of the past. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The phone had been the source of so much pain and fear. It had been a constant reminder of the curse that had nearly destroyed her. But now it was just a phone. It no longer held any power over her. With a deep breath, Sarah picked it up and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, but there were no messages, No calls from the collector. Just a blank screen. She smiled, a sense of relief washing over her. The phone was just a phone now. The curse was truly gone. She placed the phone in a box, sealing it away. It was a part of her past, but it no longer had a hold on her future. Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the skyline. It was a beautiful evening, one she had never truly appreciated before. For the first time in years, Sarah felt at peace. The curse was gone, and the darkness that had consumed her life was no more. She had faced the worst of it, and she had survived. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah was ready to face it. She had the strength to rebuild her life, to find joy in the small moments, and to embrace the possibility of a life beyond the curse. With Vincent by her side, Sarah knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but it would be hers to walk. And for the first time, that was enough. As the days turned into months, Sarah continued to rebuild her life, piece by piece. She found new purpose in her work, in her relationships, and in the simple joys of everyday life. The curse was no longer a part of her reality, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of it lifting. She had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to build something stronger. She would always carry the scars of her experiences, but they no longer defined her. And as she looked toward the future, Sarah knew that she had the strength to face whatever came next. The curse was gone, the collector was gone, and Sarah was free. Sarah had always dreamed of freedom, of a life where the shadows no longer held her captive. But now that she was free, she realized that freedom came with its own set of challenges. The weight of the past was something she couldn't easily shake off, no matter how hard she tried. The moments of peace she had found were often interrupted by flashes of the past, memories of the curse, the dark presence of the collector, the relentless fear. It was as if those moments were embedded in her very being, lingering just beneath the surface. She had been through so much, but now she had to confront the reality that healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a long and difficult process, one that would take time, patience, and understanding. Despite the absence of the curse, Sarah still found herself startled by the slightest noise. A door creaking, a shadow moving in the corner of her vision, a phone ringing unexpectedly. Each time, her heart would race, her breath would catch, and she would be reminded of the years she had spent constantly on edge, waiting for the next threat. It was hard to explain to others. How could she describe the lingering fear that had become a part of her? How could she explain that even though the curse was gone, the fear was still there, etched into her soul? Vincent noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior. He would jump at sudden sounds or withdraw into herself when the world felt too overwhelming. He had been by her side through the worst of it, but now he was unsure of how to help her navigate this new phase. He wanted to be there for her, but he didn't know how to fix what wasn't broken, just damaged. "I'm okay," Sarah would say, brushing off his concern. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. She was still trying to find her footing, still trying to figure out what it meant to be whole again. One of the hardest things Sarah faced was the feeling of losing control. The curse had taken away her sense of agency for so long. Every decision she made had been influenced by the curse, by the fear, by the need to survive. Now that the curse was gone, she found herself struggling to regain control over her life, over her choices. She had once been a woman of certainty, but now every choice felt overwhelming. Should she take the job offer that had been on the table for months? Should she move to a new city to start fresh? Should she reach out to old friends she hadn't spoken to in years? Each decision felt like a monumental task, and the fear of making the wrong choice held her back. What if she made the wrong decision and fell back into the darkness? What if she couldn't truly escape the curse, even now? It wasn't just the big decisions that felt impossible. The small, everyday choices, what to eat for dinner, what to wear, where to go, felt like a battle for control over her own life. As Sarah navigated this new phase of her life, She began to understand that peace wasn't something that could be forced or rushed. It was fragile, something that needed to be nurtured and protected. It wasn't the absence of fear or pain, but the ability to live alongside it without letting it consume her. She started to embrace the idea of imperfection. She didn't have to be completely healed or whole to move forward. It was okay to be broken. It was okay to still carry the scars. What mattered was that she was moving forward, one step at a time. Sarah began to allow herself moments of joy again. She laughed with her friends, enjoyed the simple pleasures of life, and even found herself feeling moments of gratitude for the things she once took for granted. She was learning to live again, to find beauty in the small things, even if the shadows of the past still lingered in the corners of her mind. One of the hardest things for Sarah to accept was the fear of the unknown. The curse had been a constant, something she had known and understood, even if it was a source of terror. But now that the curse was gone, she was left with the vast unknown of what came next. What did life look like without the constant threat of darkness? What did it mean to be free, truly free, when she had spent so many years living in survival mode? She had no answers, and that was the scariest part. For so long, her identity had been tied to the curse, surviving it, fighting it, breaking free from it. But now, who was she without it? The unknown stretched out before her, vast and empty. And while that could be seen as a gift, it also felt like a void, a space she wasn't sure how to fill. One of the most significant challenges Sarah faced was rebuilding trust, not just in others, but in herself. The curse had taught her to trust no one, not even her own instincts. She had been betrayed by her own mind, by the phone, by the very thing she had relied on to survive. But now, as she began to heal, she realized that trust was something she had to relearn. She had to trust that she was strong enough to make the right decisions, that she was capable of moving forward, and that she deserved the happiness she was beginning to experience. Vincent played a crucial role in this process. He was patient, never pushing her to heal faster than she was ready. He allowed her the space she needed to rebuild herself, but he was always there, ready to support her when she needed him. Slowly, Sarah began to trust again. She trusted Vincent, who had stood by her side through everything. She trusted her friends, who had never given up on her. And, most importantly, she began to trust herself again. As the months passed, Sarah began to feel a shift. The darkness that had once defined her life was no longer a presence she had to fight against. It was still there, in the form of memories and scars, but it no longer controlled her. She found herself laughing more, smiling more, and even planning for the future. The fear was still there, lurking in the background, but it no longer had the power to consume her. Sarah was learning that healing wasn't a linear process. There were days when she felt strong and hopeful, and days when the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. But she was no longer defined by the curse. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was becoming whole again, one day at a time. The future was still uncertain, but Sarah had learned to embrace it. She no longer felt the need to control every aspect of her life. She had learned to let go, to trust in the process of healing, and to allow herself the space to grow. She had faced the darkness, defeated it, and emerged stronger on the other side. The scars would always be there, but they no longer defined her. They were part of her story, but they didn't have to be the end of it. With Vincent by her side and a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah was ready to face whatever came next. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in years, she was excited to see where it would take her. Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment once more, looking out at the world below. The sun was rising, casting a golden light over the city. It was a new day, a new beginning. The curse was gone, the darkness was gone, and Sarah was free. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt at peace. She had faced the worst of it, and now she was ready to embrace the future. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she knew she was strong enough to face them. The journey wasn't over, but it was no longer defined by fear. It was defined by hope, by resilience, and by the possibility of a life reclaimed. And that was enough.